Chapter 972. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was strange and deathly silent. Princess Zhangli stared at Yu Qingcheng and his companions with a mocking smile on her face. How could a bunch of fools like them think they could rob her husband of his wealth? As for Yi Xia, she was holding Wu Qi's arm with both hands and squinting at Ji Dai and his companions. What a fat sheep! 8 supreme oracles and 8 generals with the cultivation bases of the third Panga heaven. It must taste good to refine them into fiend blood crystals. Ji Dai failed to notice the sarcasm in Princess Zhangli's eyes, and the dangerous aura of a predator emanating from Yi Xia's bones. He sneered as he looked at the longbow men around him and said, "What is the king of East Sea trying to do? Are you going to attack me?" The burly longbow men swayed their bodies slightly, their bones creaking. As soon as Wu Qi gave the order, they would pounce on Ji Dai and his companions and tear them to pieces. These longbow men were the descendants of the longbow men whom Wu Qi had saved from Myriad Immortals' planet. In their hearts, Wu Qi was the most sacred and inviolable great magus, their only faith. Wu Qi slowly sat down on the throne, crossed his legs, and looked at Ji Dai and his companions. Then, he tilted his head and pointed at the scroll in Yu Qingcheng's hand. A crisp ripping sound rang out as the supreme towers hovering over the 2 supreme oracles trembled violently. The restrictive spell they had deployed was pierced by Wu Qi's finger, and the scroll in Yu Qingcheng's hand flew up and fell into Wu Qi's hand. The 2 old oracles turned pale with fright, and Yu Qingcheng let out a strange howl as he staggered back a few steps. Several supreme oracles and generals rushed forward and surrounded Ji Dai and Yu Qingcheng, lest Wu Qi suddenly attack them. The power of his finger just now was simply too frightening. He could not believe that the restrictive spell jointly laid out by 2 supreme oracles was pierced through by him. How strong was his cultivation base? Ji Dai's face turned pale as he realized he had underestimated Wu Qi's strength. But a few years ago, Wu Qi had just broken through to the Supreme High Priest's strength. How much could he have improved in just a few years? If he had used the Profound Heart Celestial Pagoda to accelerate the flow of time and increase his cultivation, then he should be as old as these old priests around him. High priests of the human race could use all kinds of natural treasures to prolong their lives, but very few treasures could keep them young forever. Judging from the vigorous life force emanating from Wu Qi's body, one could tell that he was still in the prime of his youth, unlike the other supreme oracles who were old and withered. Ignoring the tumbling thoughts in the minds of Ji Dai, Yu Qingcheng, and the others, Wu Qi unfolded the scroll and gave it a casual glance. Wu Qi was so angry that he almost burst out laughing. He was so angry that he almost summoned Catfish, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and all the other cannibals here, so that they could skin Ji Dai and the others alive. On the scroll was a long and smelly official document, listing Wu Qi's contributions over the years, praising him for his outstanding contributions, praising him as one of the best pillars in Great Yu, a purple gold beam that supported the sea, a white jade pillar that held up the sky, and a genius who could rule the heaven and earth. At the end of the document, the tone changed, saying that since Wu Qi had made such a great contribution, it was time for him to inherit the title of King by Shan, and that Wu Qi should have a place among the 18 kings of the council. Therefore, Wu Qi was asked to take his family and his trusted guards to Liangzhu, while the affairs of the East Sea, including the war between the East Sea and the Ling dynasty, were all handed over to Ji Dai. The document also mentioned that dozens of palaces and gardens had been prepared for Wu Qi near Liangzhu, including fertile land, which was nearly 1,000,000 miles in circumference, as well as all kinds of treasures and toys. Wu Qi did not take these things seriously. He patted the scroll in his hand and asked Yu Qingcheng with a smile, "There's no need to ask, Master Yu. This is your idea, isn't it? When I've stabilized the East Sea, suppressed the eastern region, stationed the soldiers everywhere, trained the army, and strengthened the Directorate of Celestials in the East Sea, you'll come and pick the fruits, right?" Clearing his throat, Wu Qi sighed and said, "What a good plan." Not long ago, the Ling dynasty was still attacking the East Sea, so it was not very peaceful. If King Qing Qiu came here to take over the East Sea, he might be killed by a general of the Ling dynasty. Now that the Ling dynasty has sent its army to the southern and northern regions, and there are signs of war with the Shizo dynasty, You're here. Yu Qingqing chuckled, stroked his long beard proudly and said, "What did the king of East Sea say?" "This is the need of the state." Lightly tapping the throne with his fingers and bowing his head, Wu Qi pondered for a long time, then nodded slowly and said, "I've read the document. The strange thing is, I have such a large fief in the East Sea, but when I go to Liangzhu, you'll give me a piece of land with a circumference of 1,000,000 miles? Eh. 1,000,000 miles is just the land of a county. Can you really do that? The East Sea belongs to your highness, so naturally, the products will belong to you," Ji Dai said coldly. "The king of East Sea has become king by Shan, making him one of the 18 kings of Deyu's imperial council. What an honorable thing it is. Why do you care so much about it?" "Ha!" Wu Qi almost burst out laughing. Was he saying that he cared so much about it? Staring coldly at Ji Dai, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Even if I become king by Shan and one of the kings of the imperial council, what about my duties? Every king of the imperial council will be in charge of the state affairs and military affairs of Deyu. Why doesn't the document say anything about my duties?" Ji Dai's eyes flickered as he said in a cold voice, "After the king of East Sea is promoted to nobility, what he will be in charge of will be decided by the kings of the imperial council." Wu Qi spread his hands and sighed. "So you're saying that I'm just a mere figurehead? You're taking away my property and sending me to Liangzhu to retire. Ha, what do you mean by that? Burning the bridge after crossing the river, killing the donkey after the millstone has been removed. Are you out of your mind? Is this King Yang Shan's idea? Or is it some other king who made the decision? TSK, does His Majesty know about this?" "King of East Sea, what's done can't be undone," Yu Qingqing said unyieldingly. "It's a done deal." The 8 generals with the cultivation base of Hungmeng Pangu Heaven standing next to Yu Qingqing roared, "King of East Sea, please hurry to Liangzhu and promote me to the throne of King by Shan." Their thunderous roars shook the hundreds of longbow soldiers who had surrounded Ji Dai, Yu Qingqing, and the others, and blood trickled down the corners of their mouths. They roared in unison, their bodies swelling to about a mile tall, and their heads nearly smashed a hole in the ceiling of the Great Hall. Only the Great Hall in the King of East Sea's mansion was so spacious that it could accommodate hundreds of longbow men who had suddenly transformed into Dharma bodies. Suddenly, a thunderous roar rang out from outside the East Sea city, "King of East Sea, please hurry to Liangzhu and promote me to the throne of King by Shan." The roar shook the houses in the East Sea city, and it was made by at least hundreds of thousands of human warriors whose cultivation bases had reached the realm of Second Panga Heaven. At the same time, 12 extremely strong waves of magic power enveloped the East Sea city, and their mighty divine senses smashed toward Wu Qi in an unreasonable manner, as if they were going to crush Wu Qi's divine sense into pieces by relying on their numbers. Yi Xia suddenly looked up and asked with a sweet smile, "Can I eat them?" Wu Qi nodded slowly as he sensed the 12 streams of divine sense, which were at the level of supreme oracles. Laughing loudly, Yi Xia reached out her little hand and made a grabbing motion. 12 black ripples that looked like fishing nets flashed in the void, and shrill howls rang out. With a shake of her hand, the black ripples turned into billowing black smoke and disappeared into Yi Xia's palm. Black smoke continued to pour out of the void like an endless river. Horrified screams came from the sky above East Sea City. The terrifying screams lasted for a full quarter of an hour before the black smoke in the void gradually disappeared. Muffled thuds came from the entrance of the hall. 12 dried corpses of old men in black robes smashed heavily in front of the hall's entrance. The corpses that didn't have any water left were smashed into pieces, and a layer of smoke suddenly rose up. The scene was extremely tragic. The 8 supreme oracles who guarded Ji Dai and the others in the Great Hall swallowed with difficulty. The dead supreme oracles who were killed by Yi Xia were their companions, and they had stayed outside the city to lead the army to threaten the East Sea. But, they never dreamed that Yi Xia's means were so terrible that not only had she killed 12 supreme oracles from a distance, but she had also moved their bodies over the Great Hall and left them there. Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing, who had been arrogant and domineering just a moment ago, turned pale with fear. They stared at Yi Xia in horror and suddenly realized what the aura emanating from Yi Xia was. It was the dangerous aura of a predator at the top of the food chain. It was just that Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing had never realized this, so they had overlooked the dangerous aura emanating from Yi Xia. Yi Xia burped contentedly, then gently patted her belly and said to Wu Qi in a soft voice, "They are very satisfied. I just need a few more." Yi Xia's words made Wu Qi shudder and his scalp go numb. They were the 360,000 children of Wu Qi and Yi Xia. The thought of this made Wu Qi's hair stand on end. He could not believe that he and the patriarch of invisible heavenly fiends had given birth to a group of invisible heavenly fiends. Princess Zhangli glanced enviously at Yi Xia's belly and gently rubbed it. She only had one child in her belly, and it would take another 3 eons for the child to be born. Moreover, one could not accelerate time to give birth to a child. One must collect enough energy of heaven and earth from the outside world to make the child grow smoothly. Once time was accelerated, the child might be born prematurely. While the 2 little girls were lost in their own thoughts, Wu Qi slapped the document to pieces. Staring coldly at Ji Dai, he said in a low voice, "I don't think what the document says is good. I want the title of King Baishan. From now on, I, Wu Qi, am to use King Baishan, one of the 18 kings of the Imperial Council. As for the foundation of the East Sea, I can't give it to you." Ji Dai's face twitched. "King of East Sea, you," he said through clenched teeth. Wu Qi slapped Ji Dai to the ground, nearly killing him. The restrictive spell that the 8 supreme oracles had jointly laid out was broken by him, and the slap sent him rolling on the ground. "Call me King Baishan," Wu Qi said coldly. "Then, all of you will crawl out of the East Sea. Who dares to walk on 2 legs? Somebody, call Catfish." Before Wu Qi's voice could fade, a group of murderous and arsonistic fiends of the East Sea, including Ao Buzan, Immortal Jade Bone, Catfish, and others, had already broken into the Great Hall. A terrible aura filled the hall as everyone fixed their eyes on Ji Dai and his companions. Yu Qingqing's legs gave way, and he was the first to drop to his knees. Chapter 973. As soon as Yu Qingqing fell to his knees, he heard Ji Dai's roar. His knees sprang up as if they were loaded with springs, and he trembled as he stood behind Ji Dai. Ji Dai glared at the good-for-nothing Yu Qingqing, then pointed a finger at Wu Qi and growled, "King of East Sea, you are lawless." Looking coldly at Ji Dai, Wu Qi sighed and said, "King Qingqiu, what do you think His Majesty will do to you if you force me to lead the people and the people of the East Sea to join the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League after seizing my foundation?" Ji Dai and his entourage suddenly stiffened. The reason for seizing Wu Qi's foundation in the East Sea was complicated, and it involved many things in Liangzhu. But no matter what he did, as Wu Qi said, if he led the people and people of the East Sea to join the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, Ji Dai would be the first to bear the brunt of it, and even that would not quell Emperor Haozuan's wrath. As for those who had come to the East Sea with Ji Dai, they would implicate their own families, and perhaps their clans would be completely wiped out. Who knew? Emperor Haozuan's temper was not good nowadays, and if he forced the people of the East Sea to turn against him, the consequences would be immeasurable. Looking at Wu Qi with a trembling face, Ji Dai said through gritted teeth, "How shameless are you, King of East Sea?" Wu Qi crossed his legs and wagged his toes leisurely. "Seizing the foundation of others and trying to reap without sowing? Do you have a mouth full of teeth?" What Wu Qi said was the street slang he used to hang around on earth. It was a witty remark he used to make trouble. Ji Dai and the others were confused, but they knew it was not something nice. Glaring at Wu Qi for a while, Ji Dai said through clenched teeth, "Since the King of East Sea doesn't want to follow orders, let's go." They turned to leave the assembly hall, but Ao Buzan stood in front of them with his arms around Immortal Jade Bone's waist. Ao Buzan stared at him with a pair of strange eyes and laughed evilly. "Want to leave? How could it be so simple? The Lord said that you have to crawl out. TSK, kneel down, put your hands on the ground and crawl. Crawl like a dog. Otherwise, Lao Tzu will tear you apart." Yuan Qing pulled out his staff and knocked it heavily on the ground, producing a dull thud that shook the entire hall. "Didn't you hear what Master said?" he growled impatiently. "Crawl out now, or I'll give each of you a blow and cut off your roots." Catfish, on the other hand, shook her head and cried out, "Don't scare them, or their flesh will turn sour and taste bad." Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, and Silver Feather had the most direct reaction. Below their waists, they still had the bodies of boys and girls, but above their waists, they had transformed into 4 huge dragon pythons, each measuring 1,000 feet long. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Gold Feather spread their thick, ferocious wings at the back at the same time, and the 4 pairs of wings almost enveloped the entire hall. Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing's legs trembled as a ferocious aura filled the hall. They were so overwhelmed by it that they almost burst into tears. Just then, a series of footsteps was heard. Huang Liang rushed into the hall with nearly 100 captains clad in golden armor. "Your Highness," Huang Liang shouted, "which reckless fool has come to Donghai to court death?" "Who is courting death, Your Highness? If I don't smash them to pieces today, you'll kick my head like a ball." The captains emanated a mighty aura, and their cultivation bases had all reached the Hongmeng Panga heaven. Recently, Wu Qi had been operating Dark Yin Celestial Tower at full speed, selecting more than 1,000 excellent soldiers from the countless soldiers of the East Sea to train. Now, all of them had achieved something, and on average, they had reached the realm of 2 or 3 stars in the 3rd Panga heaven. The captains brought by Huang Liang were the best among them, and all of them had cultivated the cultivation techniques of the human race to around the level of 5 stars in the 3rd Panga heaven. In terms of both numbers and overall strength, they had overwhelmed the supreme oracles and captains brought by Ji Dai. Ji Dai's face was as pale as snow. Shivering, he turned to look at Wu Qi and said through gritted teeth, "King of East Sea." Wu Qi waved his hand lightly and said, "Crawl out of the city, then bring those lackeys you brought here and leave this place. The next time anyone tries to take advantage of the East Sea, I'll definitely kill his whole family." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi smiled and said to Yu Qingqing, "Remember, when you go back, you must tell those who are supporting you in the East Sea that I, Wu Qi, am a loyal subject of Diyu. I, Wu Qi, am a loyal subject of Diyu, but don't you dare to plot against me. I'm a loyal subject when you're not plotting against me, but if you dare to plot against me, I'll bring all the soldiers and civilians of the East Sea to the Celestial Court right now." Well, with my current strength and influence, the 6 celestial emperors of the Celestial Court will at least give me the position of a great celestial emperor with real power. Do you understand? With a wave of his hand, he threw another slap at Ji Dai's face. The invisible slap sent Ji Dai tumbling 3 times in the air. Half of his face was smashed and all his teeth fell to the ground. "I don't care who you are," snapped Wu Qi. "I don't care if you are a king or a supreme oracle, crawl out of the East Sea right now," or, Catfish's head had turned into a huge dragon's head. She stuck out her tongue and licked Ji Dai's face, then shook her head and said, "I'm so scared that I can't eat him anymore." Can you break his legs and keep him in the barn for a few days before eating him?" Ji Dai gave Wu Qi a venomous look. Trembling, he lay on the ground and crawled step by step toward the front gate of the King of East Sea's mansion. When Yu Qingqing saw that Ji Dai had swallowed the humiliation, he quickly got down on the ground and crawled out the door after him. The 8 supreme oracles and the 8 generals of Hongmeng Panga heaven who had followed Ji Dai into the King of East Sea's mansion stood where they were and cried out in unison, "We can die, but how can we endure such humiliation? King of East Sea, we'll fight you to the death." With a loud cry, the supreme oracles and generals were about to pounce on Wu Qi. Wu Qi gently waved his hand and said indifferently, "Well, since you don't want to crawl out of the East Sea, do you think I'm such an unreasonable man? You can walk out of here. But King Qing Qiu and Yu Qingqing must crawl out." With a strange laugh, Wu Qi said leisurely, "Since you've crawled down like a dog, you might as well work hard to be a dog." Wu Qi's words stunned the oracles and generals. They glanced at Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing with a hint of disdain and shame in their eyes. When had the people of Diyu, especially the aristocratic clans and nobles of Diyu, ever suffered such humiliation? Even the people of Deyu had stood up straight and died honorably. When had they ever been humiliated like this? Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing were so angry that their faces turned purple and they coughed up a mouthful of blood. But Wu Qi did not allow them to get up. Ao Buzan and a group of ferocious men watched them and forced them to crawl out of the King of East Sea's mansion through the main gate of the King of East Sea and hundreds of miles out of the East Sea city. The oracles and generals who accompanied Ji Dai felt so humiliated that they sped away without saying a word, even ignoring the 300,000 elite soldiers Ji Dai had brought with him from the East Sea. With them gone, the top forces of the East Sea that Ji Dai had brought with him were gone. The strongest ones in the army were just over 100 generals who were at the peak of the 9 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. Under the watch of Ao Buzan and the others, Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing crawled into the camp in front of the army of 300,000 soldiers. On the walls of the East Sea city, countless soldiers of the East Sea cheered and laughed at Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing, who were as timid as mice after crawling for hundreds of miles. The morale of the 300,000 soldiers Ji Dai had brought with him was completely gone, and they all hung their heads dejectedly, losing the vigor they had when they came. Before long, 300 flying ships rose into the sky as Ji Dai fled west with his army in a sorry state. Standing on the west gate tower of the East Sea city, Wu Qi looked at the 300 flying ships and gently patted the battlement with his right hand. Who came up with this stupid idea of seizing the foundation of the East Sea? Wu Qi glanced over his shoulder at Su Qin, who was standing behind him. Do you think there's something behind this, old mister? Su Qin stroked his long beard and said coolly, it has been a taboo since ancient times for a weak lord to have a strong vassal. Especially to Deyu, your highness is an outsider. Even the members of Deyu's imperial clan and nobles can betray Deyu, let alone your highness, a commoner from the wilderness. After a moment of pondering, Su Qin smiled faintly and said, besides, I'm afraid that Emperor Haozuan, the human emperor. He, why don't your highness send someone to Liangzhu to find out what's going on? Wu Qi frowned and said in a low voice, sending someone is like sending a sheep into a tiger's den. I'll have to go there myself. Glancing at the flying ships that were flying away, Wu Qi said coolly, but I need to teach them a lesson. I need to let those people in Liangzhu who are spying on the East Sea know that there are some things they can't do, or they will die if they do. Gently patting Jin Jiao on the head, Wu Qi asked softly, I've been running around these days and haven't had time to take care of you. Well, you must be very hungry these days, aren't you? Jin Jiao's eyes turned green as he pointed at the 300 flying ships and asked, Boss, we've been hungry for a long time. Can we eat them all? Wu Qi clapped his hands and chuckled. After pondering for a moment, he gave the order, how many flags, armors, and armaments of the Ling dynasty are there in the storehouse of the East Sea? Pick a group of elites and have them change into their armors, then follow me to entertain King Qing Qiu. Send a message to the underhand sect, asking them to pick a group of elites and disciples to act according to my plan. Glancing at the 300 flying ships that were flying away, Wu Qi said leisurely, just leave a few people to go back to Liangzhu to deliver the message. Yu Qingqing can stay, but as for the others, among the 300 flying ships, Ji Dai's flagship was hysterically smashing everything in the main hall. He was cursing Wu Qi and everything related to Wu Qi like a madman, swearing hysterically that he would kill Wu Qi and his entire clan, then take Princess Zhanglu and Yi Xia into his room and torture them. Standing in a corner of the hall, Yu Qingqing also clenched his fists and swore to himself. But suddenly, both of them shuddered at the same time, and a chill rushed from the soles of their feet to their heads. Chapter 974. The sudden sense of danger made Ji Dai stiffen. Hurry back to Liangzhu at full speed, he cried out. Hurry back to Liangzhu at full speed. At this moment, Ji Dai hated the 8 supreme oracles who had abandoned him to the bone. If they had not abandoned him, they could have easily brought the 300 flying ships back to Liangzhu. They were so fast that they would not have to worry about being intercepted halfway. But now, it would take them at least 3 months to get back to Liangzhu, even at the fastest speed. 3 months was more than enough for Wu Qi to make all kinds of arrangements against him and kill him on the way. Without a primordial expert to hold the fort, his army of 300,000 soldiers might seem intimidating, but what was the use? The 300 flying ships left long white trails in the sky as they sped toward Liangzhu at full speed, ignoring the huge consumption of immortal stones. Even so, Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing felt uneasy. They kept urging their soldiers to move forward at a high speed, showing no concern for the ship's power core. Even though the ship was trembling and shaking because it had exceeded its limit, they kept flying forward at such a high speed. Fortunately, the flying ships produced by De Yu's military court were of excellent quality, so they did not break down even after flying for 3 days and 3 nights. Directly in front of the ships was a stretch of mountains that stretched for hundreds of thousands of miles, piercing the sky like blades. The terrain of this mountain range was very strange. Every mountain peak looked like a sword that had been stabbed into the ground. The strangely shaped mountain peaks were hundreds of miles tall, standing on the ground. When the strong wind blew across this place, the mountain peaks would tear apart the strong wind and let out deafening noises that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves, spreading to thousands of miles away. Ji Dai urged the ships to speed forward. The 300 ships plunged into the mountains, flying along a winding valley that was no more than 10 miles wide between the peaks. Having lost the supreme oracles, Ji Dai and the others did not notice the nearly 100,000 elite soldiers in the armor of the Ling dynasty lying in ambush on the nearby peaks. Just as the flying ship flew to the heart of the mountain range, a clanging sound suddenly rang out, and thousands of Ling dynasty's military flags flew into the air. The flags were ragged and full of cuts and holes from swords and arrows, and there were also large patches of blood stains on them, which made them look very glaring. Thousands of flags fluttered in the air, shrouding the hearts of Ji Dai and the others like a dark cloud. Before Ji Dai could give the order to respond, 3 Qi energy cannons, a secret weapon of the Ling dynasty, had been loaded at the top of a mountain a few miles away. When Wu Qi saw the cannons seized from a conquered city of the Ling dynasty, Wu Qi could not help but exclaim, "What a spendthrift!" The cannons were not large in size, but the projectiles they fired were astonishing. They were the 5 elements beads condensed from acquired 5 elements energy. These pearls, condensed from the acquired essence of the 5 elements, were the material for crafting superior-grade gold immortal artifacts, but Ling dynasty had developed such a deadly ballista, firing it with these rare pearls as cannonballs. There was no doubt that the power of the 1 Qi spirit pill cannon was abnormal. Along with the 3 cannons were 27 5 elements beads. Now, 3 of them had been loaded into the cannons. Standing on a nearby mountain, Wu Qi, clad in the armor of a general of the Ling dynasty, covered his face with a golden mask. He gently waved his hand, and Huang Liang, who was wearing the same outfit, cried out, "Fire!" Amidst the frightening clappers, 3 beams of red light shot out of the cannons and smashed into the formation of flying ships under Ji Dai's command like a hot knife through butter. With a deafening rumble, 18 ships were pierced by the red light, leaving large holes about a mile in diameter in their surfaces. Heavily wounded soldiers could be seen falling out of the holes, blood gushing out of their wounds. Plumes of smoke rose from the ships as they plummeted to the ground. The bright light exploded, and a red shockwave swept across the valley. More than 30 flying ships twisted and shattered in the bright light, and even the soldiers on the ships were blown up into the sky. The power of the explosion of the 3 5 element beads spread out in all directions. 2 lofty mountains were broken in the middle, and huge rocks were sent flying hundreds of miles away, causing sparks to fly out from the surrounding mountain peaks. The huge impact sound was so loud that it made people's eardrums hurt. "King of East Sea! You!" Ji Dai rushed out of the main hall of his flagship and shouted, pointing his fingers and shouting. The screams stopped abruptly. Ji Dai looked in horror at the banners of Ling dynasty around him, as well as the elite soldiers armed with heavy crossbows and clad in gorgeous armors that were very different from Great Yu's, who had quietly appeared on the mountains in all directions. On nearly 100 mountains, 100,000 soldiers pulled the trigger at the same time. Each of the 100,000 crossbows was equipped with 12, 24, or 36 bolts. The bolts of the Ling dynasty were very delicate. Arrows of the same length were generally only 1/3 to 1/4 the diameter of Dayu's standard bolts. Therefore, the heavy crossbows of the Ling dynasty could carry more bolts than those of Dayu's. Dayu's bolts were designed to kill with one shot. Even a general would be half dead if he was hit by an arrow. However, the style of the Ling dynasty's bolts was very different from that of Dayu's. In addition to all kinds of armor-piercing and curse-breaking talismans, the bolts also had other useless talismans, such as whistling and glowing. Once the 100,000 crossbow bolts were triggered, over 1,000,000 arrows were shot out, leaving long streaks of light in the air, creating sharp whistling sounds like shooting stars, covering over 200 flying ships. The bolts weaved into a huge net and swept across the ships that did not have time to activate their defensive mechanisms, causing the soldiers on the decks to fall like dumplings. If there were supreme oracles in the army, the defensive mechanisms of the ships would have been activated as soon as possible, leaving no chance for the crossbows to launch a surprise attack. However, Qixia had killed 12 supreme oracles, and the other 8 had abandoned Ji Dai. Now, there were only a few oracles with low cultivation bases in Ji Dai's army. All the soldiers on the decks of the ships, which were about a mile long on average, were badly wounded by the bolts. The lucky ones were struggling and moaning on the decks, while the unlucky ones had fallen from the sky into the cloudy valley. No one knew what kind of miserable fate they had suffered. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and the other fierce beasts under Wu Qi's command, who ate human beings for pleasure, were hiding in the valley, happily opening their mouths to devour the food that fell from the sky. Every drop of the blood essence of these powerful human soldiers contained a strong life force, which was the best tonic for Gold Horn and the others to improve their strength. Amidst Ji Dai's panicked and disorganized command, over 200 ships that had survived the bombardment rushed out of the valley and headed for Liangzhou as fast as they could. Standing on the deck with trembling hands and feet, Ji Dai threw his head back and roared, "Why are there soldiers of the Ling dynasty here? Why are there soldiers of the Ling dynasty here?" Yu Qingqing's face was livid. He knew more or less where these soldiers of the Ling dynasty came from, but who would believe him? Where was the evidence? Wu Qi did not order the soldiers to chase after them. Although human soldiers could fly for a short time, it was unrealistic to compare their speed with the ships. Huang Liang led the soldiers back to the East Sea, while Wu Qi and a group of fierce beasts followed Ji Dai's ship from a distance. After a few more days, an extremely treacherous mountain blocked the way of the flying boat like a screen. Hundreds of miles high and thousands of miles wide, the mountain was pitch black and emanated a ferocious aura. A stream of grayish-white energy shot up into the sky from the top of the mountain and turned into 3 looming gray lotus flowers. Ji Dai, who was fleeing with a venomous heart, looked at the 3 gray lotus flowers and ordered without hesitation, "How dare itinerant immortals openly cultivate here? What do they think Dayu's decree is? Men, raise this itinerant immortal lair to the ground for me." Yu Qingqing wanted to persuade Ji Dai, but Ji Dai would not listen. 30 flying ships with more than 20,000 soldiers rushed toward the mountain. The decks at the prow of the ships opened to reveal powerful heavy-duty crossbows. But before they could fire, a soft cry came from the mountain. Tu Xiaobai rushed out with a group of underhand sect's demon immortals. Wielding a pair of huge hammers, she glared at them with her red eyes and smashed the flying ships to pieces with the hammers. One after another, the demon immortals at the rear unleashed their immortal binding chains, demon binding chains, and other restraining magical treasures, capturing all the soldiers. Tu Xiaobai gave Ji Dai and the others a fierce glare, then unleashed the spiritual pressure unique to a primordial immortal and smashed into them. Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing coughed up mouthfuls of blood and once again ordered the army to flee at full speed. After fleeing for another 5 or 6 days, Ji Dai saw a dozen fiend immortals in front of the fleet, clad in black robes and shrouded in roiling fiend auras. They were at most heaven immortals, carrying baskets filled with worthless herbs on their backs. Ji Dai was overjoyed. Having suffered 2 defeats in a row, he immediately ordered the fiend immortals to be captured alive so he could vent his anger. As a result, the fiend immortals were easily captured. But, as soon as Ji Dai cut off the arm of one fiend immortals, a large cloud of dark clouds came rolling over. More than 1,000 fiend immortals with the cultivation base of gold immortals gritted their teeth and launched a frenzied attack. How could Ji Dai's army, with only a few hundred second Panga heaven generals, withstand the onslaught? One flying ship after another was destroyed, and only about 90 managed to escape, while the captured fiend immortals were rescued. Only then did Ji Dai realize that he had stirred up another hornet's nest. Although the cultivation base of those fiend immortals was weak, they had a strong backing. After being severely wounded 3 times in a row, even Yu Qingqing began to wonder if he and his men had run into bad luck this time. A few more days passed, and they would be back in Yuxiong Plain in a month's time. Suddenly, Ji Dai saw a beautiful girl flying past on a flying sword in a corner of the fleet. For some reason, Ji Dai ordered his men to stop the girl and flirt with her with obscenities. The frightened girl suddenly screamed, "Godfather, someone is bullying Xue Mei." A furious roar towered into the sky as a tricolored flame swept across the sky. The furious Supremacy 3 flame was cursing Ji Dai's mother, breathing flames that scorched Ji Dai's soldiers, and then burned Ji Dai's thighs into a plume of smoke. Ji Dai howled miserably. Finally, he activated his life-saving talisman and fled back to Liangzhu with Yu Qingqing. The 300,000 soldiers he brought with him were all wiped out. Chapter 975. Standing on a high mountain outside Liangzhu, Wu Qi, Princess Xianglu, and Yi Xia happened to see Ji Dai fly across the sky in a blood-red beam of light and disappear into the city like a ghost. Wu Qi chuckled. With a thought in his mind, the surrounding earth energy rolled up and wrapped the 3 of them up before plunging silently into the ground. Yi Xia unleashed a 7-colored cloud to shroud the surroundings, and with that, the 3 of them slipped into Liangzhu as if they did not exist. Emperor Haozuan was not in the city at the moment. He was leading the Flying Bear army to suppress the southern provinces and win over the hearts of the people. Liangzhu's most powerful defensive formation was left unmanned, so no one could find Wu Qi and his companions. There should be Dao-breaking experts in the secret palace of Diyu, but according to the tradition of the human race, such experts would either hibernate or hide in secret caves to cultivate in seclusion. They would never pay attention to the ordinary affairs in Liangzhu. So Wu Qi and his companions entered the city without any trouble, following the aura left behind by Ji Dai into King Yangshan's mansion. Along the way, Wu Qi marveled at how lucky Ji Dai was. As expected of King Yangshan's eldest son, he must have some good life-saving treasures. According to Wu Qi's instructions, Ji Dai's death could be regarded as a warning to those with evil intentions, and Yu Qingqing should be left behind to report back to Liangzhu. But, Ji Dai was protected by a spirit talisman, and when he transformed into a blood-red beam of light, even Supremacy 3 flame could not catch up with him and could only watch him flee. Along the way, Wu Qi had given Ji Dai a few ruthless attacks. Perhaps Ji Dai was so depressed that he wanted to kill himself. Although he did not kill him, the effect was not much different, and the psychological blow he suffered was probably much more serious than if he were killed. In a secret cave about 100,000 feet underground in the backyard of King Yangshan's mansion, a spacious stone chamber was as simple and neat as the other buildings in Diyu. This stone chamber was built with black stone slabs that were several tens of feet thick and had a length of 1,000 feet and a height of 100 feet. In this spacious stone chamber, there were only a dozen or so heavy stone stools placed neatly as chairs, and nothing else. Dozens of bronze human hands were embedded in the wall, each hand holding a human head-sized mermaid pearl. Inside the translucent bead, there were faint clouds and ocean waves swirling. The bright light from the bead illuminated the entire stone room. The light shone from all directions, leaving no shadow on the ground. In particular, the mermaid pearl had a kind of strange and mystical ability. Its light was a natural-born forbidden object. In the Buddhist sect, it was also known as the stainless and dustless pearl. Ordinary forbidden spells would emit different colored smokes and smells when they came into contact with the light emitted by the mermaid pearl, which was enough to attract the attention of others. The fact that so many rare mermaid pearls were used as lamps showed that this secret cave was an extremely important place in King Yangshan's mansion. When Wu Qi, Princess Xianglu, and Yi Xia entered the stone chamber, they were also repelled by the light from the mermaid pearl. However, Wu Qi immediately absorbed the light with the primal purple energy and fused his aura with it. The three of them entered the stone chamber steadily and attached themselves to one of the pearls. Hovering amidst the strong light, they quietly looked at the people in the chamber. King Yangshan sat on a stone stool in the middle, his hands on his knees and his face serious. Around him sat 7 kings of the same status as him. Among them, Wu Qi recognized King Yin Shan, King Zhang Shan, King Hao Shan, King Ding Shan, and King Gu Shan. All 5 of them were King Yangshan's diehard followers. The other 2, as they were called, were King Yuan Shan and King Jing Shan. Clearly, they were the allies that King Yangshan had recruited these days. Apparently, after a few major upheavals, King Yangshan's power in the imperial court of Diyu had expanded a lot. All the kings, dressed in black robes, sat in a semicircle around King Yangshan. Judging from their posture, it was clear that King Yangshan was their leader, the leader of this small group. Everyone sat in the same posture as King Yangshan, with their backs straight, their legs apart, and their hands on their knees. They sat on the stone blocks, giving people the feeling that they really were mountains. Not long after Wu Qi and his companions sneaked into the chamber, they heard a loud noise, and then Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing darted out of a corner of the room. A bolt of lightning burst out from the corner and spat them out, then everything returned to normal. Wu Qi glanced at the corner and saw a small, short-distance teleportation formation, which could teleport no more than 300,000 feet away. Presumably, it was used to communicate with the ground. Ji Dai's thighs were burned clean by Supremacy 3 Flame's natal true flame, and he was carried into the chamber by Yu Qingqing. Only then did he let out a miserable howl of pain. Trembling, he rolled on the ground, crawled a few steps toward King Yangshan, and suddenly coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. Judging from his appearance, he looked so miserable that anyone with a soft heart would not have the heart to punish him. But Wu Qi could see clearly that the blood he coughed up was bright red. It must have been forced out by himself, not some new internal injury. And, according to Ji Dai's cultivation base, his legs should have recovered long ago. Given the speed at which the cultivation technique of the human race could heal the fleshly body, he should not have come to see King Yangshan with an incomplete body. Clearly, he was pretending to be pitiful. But King Yangshan was not an ordinary man. When he saw Ji Dai's appearance, he snorted coldly and waved his hand, sending out an invisible force that knocked Ji Dai flying away. Ji Dai howled miserably as all his bones were shattered. The blow had almost killed him. I don't have a useless son like you. You're a waste of my face. King Yangshan growled in a low voice. Glaring angrily at Yu Qingqing, King Yangshan said in a flat tone, "The Flying Bear Army has newly established the Camp of Death, and Ji Dai is its first lieutenant. Master Yu, you can help Ji Dai with military affairs. Now get the hell out of here." Yu Qingqing shuddered with fear. Knowing that King Yangshan had learned that he and Ji Dai had crawled out of the East Sea City, he dared not to argue. Obediently, he helped Ji Dai up and walked out of the stone chamber. Ji Dai was scared out of his wits as well. His bones were broken, but he dared not to make a sound and let Yu Qingqing take him out. Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu exchanged a glance and smiled. The so-called Death Battalion was an army similar to a suicide squad. Ji Dai's defeat had obviously lost King Yangshan's favor, and he would have to bear the consequences in the future. But then again, it was easy for a suicide squad to make meritorious service. If Ji Dai could fight with his life on the line, perhaps his future would still be bright. King Yangshan, whose face was trembling with anger, cursed in a low voice, "What a useless unfilial son. He should really be stripped of his throne." "Don't be angry, Brother King," King Yin Shan said coolly. "Young people are inexperienced, so a little mistake is not a big deal. It's just that we have to think of a way to get rid of this King East Sea." Wu Qi's ears pricked up at King Yin Shan's words. Why King Yangshan and the others were against him, and why they sent Ji Dai to plunder his peaches. These were all questions in Wu Qi's mind. Suddenly, King Shan sneered and said, "Those who are not of our race must have a different heart." This guy has snuck into Yu and has been showing his loyalty. He deserves to die. Wu Qi was shocked. What did he mean by, those who are not of our race must have a different heart? Why did he say that? Although Wu Qi was now cultivating the scroll of stealing and had transformed his body into a chaotic body, and although he was one of the chaos-fiend gods in his previous life, he was a real human being in this life. He was not some scourge, and he had no conspiracy against Yu. So, why did he use this word to describe himself? King Gu Shan said coldly, "This guy is very powerful now, and he has countless troops under his command. If we confront him head-on, I'm afraid we won't be able to get away with it. If those people know that this guy is the spy you planted on Myriad Immortals' planet, you will be in a very passive position." King Yang Shan heaved a long sigh. Frowning, he said in a low voice, "When the Celestial Court wiped out the dozen or so strongholds I had set up in outer heavenly realms, I thought the people of the Spring and Autumn Warring States period in the mortal world had long been wiped out. Who knew they would end up like this?" King Yang Shan sighed again and said, "They are very capable. I can't believe they are able to break the black celestial forbidden curse, and even the ancestor god I worship, Lao Ai, has kept his mouth shut about it. This shows how much their power has grown. If we don't get rid of them, sooner or later, they will become a great threat to me, do you?" Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu looked at each other. Their lips moved slightly, and they said the name Lu Buwei at the same time. Wu Qi's heart was filled with hatred. If he had known this, he would have strangled Lu Buwei to death, or captured him alive. Why did he have to leave him in the way? Wu Qi and the 6 states could hide what they were doing from the world, but how could they hide it from the old traitor, Lu Buwei? All he had to do was tell Lu Bang about it and send a letter to Liangzhu, and the East Sea's background would be known to the world. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Wu Qi looked at King Yang Shan to see what else he had to say. King Yang Shan, who was in a very bad mood, kept sighing. After a long while, he shook his head and said, "Ever since His Majesty revealed that he does not want to pass the throne to other princes, and intends to choose one of us to succeed him, I was indeed tempted. I was indeed tempted, and the Black Mountain King was even more overbearing. If King He Shan learns about the King of East Sea's background, it's not a big deal that I can't get the throne, but if the throne falls into King He Shan's hands, what should we do if he wants to settle the score with us later?" King Yuan Shan and King Jing Shan's faces twitched slightly, but they returned to normal in the blink of an eye. Wu Qi saw the change in their expressions, and King Yang Shan seemed to sense it as well. "King Yuan Shan, King Jing Shan," he said in a low voice, "you and King He Shan are old friends, why don't you?" King Yuan Shan and King Jing Shan were silent for a long time, and then they shook their heads. They had chosen King Yang Shan's ship, so how could they get off? After waiting for a long time and not seeing them move, King Yang Shan cleared his throat and said in a flat voice, "Ji Dai is a good for nothing. He has turned a good thing into something so outrageous. Now that the King of East Sea has his guard up against us, things are going to be difficult. In short, we either bring the King of East Sea to Liangzhu and keep him there, or wipe out his power completely. There is no other way." The kings in the chamber exchanged glances. Then, Chi rose to his feet and said, "What should we do, brother king?" King Yang Shan was silent for a moment, then slowly raised his right hand and gently swung it down. Chapter 976. The few kings in the chamber breathed a sigh of relief at the same time when they saw King Yang Shan's palm strike, which was as sharp as a blade. They rose to their feet slowly, ready to bid farewell to King Yang Shan, and then split up to assemble their top experts to eradicate the upper echelons of the East Sea. As long as Wu Qi and the other upper echelons of the East Sea were wiped out, it would be a piece of cake to conquer the vast territory and countless people of the East Sea. Just as the kings rose to their feet, time and space in the chamber froze at the same time. Without the slightest resistance, the kings stood stiffly with their knees slightly bent. The jade talismans and jade pendants they wore exploded as if they had gone berserk, and the strong flashes made them look like light bulbs. But these talismans, which were made by the supreme oracles of the secret palace, could not break the frozen time and space around them, and could not save their masters from being imprisoned. Only the space about 10 feet around King Yangshan remained normal in the vast chamber. Sensing the strange atmosphere around him, King Yangshan jumped to his feet in horror and glanced around. Amidst a cracking sound, King Yangshan took out 2 jade talismans that looked like ghost faces and crushed them. A circle of hazy light shone on him, and a low ghostly howl could be vaguely heard coming out of it. A few ghostly shadows surrounded King Yangshan, making his body hazy and making it so that any divine will that tried to get close to him would quickly slip away. Wu Qi clapped his hands softly as he slowly emerged from the glow of the pearl. When he first appeared, he was only the size of a thumb, but gradually, he grew larger and larger, and by the time he came before King Yangshan, he had returned to his normal height. With a flick of his finger, a stone block slid behind him, and Wu Qi reached out his hand gracefully to King Yangshan. A nice defensive talisman, but it's useless against me. Please take a seat, Your Highness. King Yangshan's eyes narrowed, but before he could do anything, 2 terrible divine senses with a strong sense of warning came whistling down from a place he could not perceive. The ghostly shadows around him shattered with a boom, and he staggered back 2 steps before sitting down on the stone block. King Yangshan was shocked. Only now did he realize that in addition to Wu Qi, there were 2 other formidable figures hiding in this stone chamber. Staring fixedly at Wu Qi, King Yangshan asked in a hoarse, hesitant voice, "The Saint Realm?" Wu Qi was taken aback, and then he remembered that the cultivation realms of the human race had their own system. The oracles who were equal to heaven immortals were marked by the symbol of the moon, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the first Panga heaven. The oracles who were equal to gold immortals were marked by the symbol of the full moon, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the second Panga heaven. The oracles who were equal to primordial unity golden immortals were the supreme oracles, marked by the supreme tower, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the first Panga heaven. When one surpassed the primordial realm and stepped into the Tao-breaking realm, the humans called it the Saint Realm. Once they entered the Saint Realm, there would no longer be any difference between priests and generals. Whether it was close combat or spells and curses, they would be extremely powerful. In other words, any expert of the Saint Realm was in existence who cultivated both magic and fleshly body, just like the 2 most famous figures of the human race, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong. King Yangshan himself was still hanging around in Hongmeng Panga heaven, but he was knowledgeable enough to easily imprison a few kings of the council, whose cultivation bases were equal to his. And not only did he freeze space, but even time and the activity of their divine will. This was something that only an almighty expert of the Saint Realm could do. Wu Qi nodded lightly and smiled faintly. King Yangshan was stunned when he saw the smile on Wu Qi's face. According to the information provided by Lu Bue, how many years had it been since Wu Qi began to cultivate seriously? And how many years had it been since he entered Panga continent? Even if he had a rare constitution that allowed him to cultivate both magic and fleshly body, how could he have stepped into the Saint Realm? And it seemed that his cultivation base was extremely astonishing, for he could imprison a few kings of the council without batting an eyelid. No one who had just stepped into the Saint Realm could do this. The Saint Realm. King Yangshan heaved a long sigh and said, "The cultivation techniques of the human race are the fastest, but after stepping into the realm of supreme heaven and the realm of primordial, the speed has slowed down. Compared to the short lifespan of the human race, be it the oracles who have stepped into the realm of supreme heaven or the generals who have stepped into the realm of primordial, they will not have enough time to break through the Saint Realm. In order to do so, time is not a problem. The key is one's own aptitude and fortune." With a wave of his hand, Wu Qi produced a small tea table, a small teapot, and 2 exquisite teacups out of thin air. Then, Yuan Ling True Flame sprayed out of his palm and boiled a pot of innate true water taken from Yuan Ling's nether realm, then threw in a few tea leaves from Yuan Ling's nether realm. These tea trees were planted by Yuan Ling himself, and the seeds were collected from the first innate tea tree, which was a real innate spirit root. As he boiled the tea, Wu Qi smiled and said, "My aptitude is very good, and my fortune is good. That's why I was lucky enough to step into the Saint Realm in such a short time. To tell you the truth, Your Highness, Wu Qi is now at the peak of the Saint Realm." King Yangshan jumped to his feet in horror and stared fixedly at Wu Qi, unable to speak for a long time. The peak of the Saint Realm? How could he be at the peak of the Saint Realm? This was ridiculous. The two sacred emperors of the human race, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong, were only at the peak of the Saint Realm, and they often went to Empress Hua's palace to listen to the teachings of the Huahuang clan. It had taken them countless years and countless virtues to reach this level. So, how could Wu Qi have reached this realm so easily? The more the tea was boiled, the more fragrant it became. Wu Qi took out a few jade bottles the size of a thumb and dripped a few drops of rare natural treasures, such as the 100-million-year-old hollow azurite, which came from Yuanling's nether realm, into the tea. Since the fall of Yuanling, until Wu Qi, the reincarnated man, returned to Yuanling's nether realm and took back his lair, he had accumulated a lot of these treasures. There were exactly 2 cups of tea in a pot the size of a fist. Wu Qi poured a cup of tea for King Yangshan, then carefully handed it to him. Your Highness, try this cup of tea. The medicinal strength is very strong. Your Highness is now at the 6 stars realm of Hongmeng Panga heaven, isn't it? I didn't notice that your Highness's cultivation base was hidden so deeply before. This cup of tea should be able to help your Highness advance by 1 star. King Yangshan took the cup of tea, gave Wu Qi a look, clenched his teeth, and poured the tea into his mouth. As soon as the hot tea entered his mouth, it turned into a violent stream of energy that rushed through his body. A series of cracking noises rang out inside of him, and in just a quarter of an hour, his body suddenly grew about half an inch taller. A crack appeared on his forehead, from which a layer of dead skin began to peel off. As Wu Qi had said, his cultivation base had broken through a minor realm. Wu Qi picked up the cup and drank it in 1 gulp. Although the tea contained a huge amount of energy, it only had a strong effect on those in the realm of Tao reasoning. For experts of Wu Qi's level, ordinary natural treasures and innate spirit roots were of no benefit to his cultivation base, unless they were eaten as meals. At most, they could be used as mouthwash to improve the taste. Putting down the cup, King Yangshan said coldly, "Thank you, thank you." Wu Qi dropped the cup and said with a chuckle, "You flatter me." This cup of tea is Wu Qi's way of returning the favor. King Yangshan was taken aback. "What favor do I owe you?" he asked in surprise. Staring into King Yangshan's eyes, Wu Qi said leisurely, "When I first came to Panga continent, King Yangqiu took good care of me. Later, it was with the help of your Highness's power that I gradually achieved what I have today. If I hadn't been under your Highness's protection, I'm afraid I would have been killed by some malicious people." Lightly tapping the tea table with his fingers, Wu Qi sighed and said, "Take the army of hundreds of millions of soldiers in the East Sea for example. If I hadn't drawn that energy vein from Yuxiong Plain, how could I have trained so many soldiers? If I hadn't been your Highness's confidant, appreciated by Emperor Haozuan, and made some contributions, how could I have received such treatment? So you know." King Yangshan snapped. With a flip of his palm, Wu Qi sent out a gust of evil wind, forcing all of King Yangshan's words back into his stomach. "Do you want to hear what I'm thinking?" Wu Qi said with a cold grin. "In fact, I don't mean any harm to you. I just want to have a stable foundation for me and the people around me, so that we can live a good, carefree life. The East Sea is more than enough for us to live a good life." With a sigh, Wu Qi rose to his feet, shook his head, and said, "Gao and I are brothers. If you hadn't schemed against the East Sea, I would have been working hard for you. At the very least, I would have wiped out the Ling dynasty and made the Celestial Court suffer. But, you shouldn't have listened to Lu Bue." With a strange smile on his face, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "His plans have been ruined by me several times. So many of his relatives and clansmen have died because of me, and he is now an important minister of the Ling dynasty. You schemed against your own minister because of the words of someone from an enemy dynasty. You are so stupid that I don't even want to say anything." A clump of Panga's sacred energy emerged from Wu Qi's palm, turning into a nebula and wheeling rapidly in his palm. Staring at the clump of energy, Wu Qi sighed and said, "What do you mean by those who are not of our race must have a different heart? Hee hee, can't you see? I'm a real human being, except that I'm not a native of Pangu continent. You shouldn't have schemed against me, because I mean no harm to your highness and Gao. With a sigh, Wu Qi rose to his feet and said with a smile, the favor has been repaid, and the matter has been cleared up. As for what to do in the future, it all depends on your highness's decision. Tilting his head, Wu Qi said in a frivolous manner, but, since your highness and all the kings of the council have made it clear that I may cause harm to Du, then I'll do a little harm to Du. Well, of course, as long as your highness is not stupid enough to reveal my identity, the king of Black Mountain will not be able to use my background to attack your highness. Your highness is still very confident in inheriting the throne. With a loud laugh, Wu Qi transformed into a beam of green light and disappeared into the distance. Yi Xia and Princess Zhang followed closely behind Wu Qi. The confinement around them suddenly vanished, and the few kings of the council continued to rise to their feet as if nothing had happened. It was as if what had just happened did not exist in their senses. Looking at the bare stone chamber, King Yangshan felt a chill in his heart. He had no idea what Wu Qi was going to do, or how he was going to harm Du. All of a sudden, the surroundings began to shake violently. As the kings rushed out of the ground, they soon received a piece of earth-shattering news. The Pangu's map, a secret treasure hidden in the depths of Du's palace, had been taken away by an unknown person, and the 12 supreme oracles guarding the treasure were all knocked out before they could even see who it was. All their belongings were robbed, and even their supreme towers were opened by someone with a mystic art. All their life savings were taken away. King Yangshan's vision darkened, and he almost fainted. Chapter 977. Emperor Haozuan was touring the southern region and not in Liangzhu. Together with Princess Zhang and Yi Xia, Wu Qi easily snatched the Pangu's map from the secret vault in the deepest part of Du's imperial palace, and robbed all the oracles guarding it. It was Yi Xia's wicked hobby. Although Wu Qi had stopped her from turning these oracles into dried corpses, he could not stop them from becoming poor. After sending Princess Zhang and Yi Xia back to the East Sea to guard against King Yangshan and others doing anything to the East Sea, Wu Qi brought the Pangu's map to Greathorns' lair. It happened that Yao Ling was visiting Greathorns, so Wu Qi and the two of them opened the Pangu's map and were admiring the extraordinary artifact that was said to be the great Saint Pangu's cornea. Wu Qi thought the origin of the artifact was quite reliable. If it was not the organ in Pangu's own eye, what other artifact could easily monitor everything on Pangu continent at any time? Even the slightest changes in the underground energy veins would be reflected by the artifact. So, the origin of the artifact could only be explained by the great Saint Pangu's cornea. The Pangu's map had no specific entity. It was just a drifting mass of colorful light. If one shrunk it, it could shrink to the size of a palm, and if one wanted to expand it, it could become tens of thousands of miles or even millions of miles in circumference. As long as one wanted, it could expand almost endlessly. Once the colorful light expanded, there would be a light screen in it that reflected the mountains and rivers on Pangu continent. By communicating with it with divine sense, one could see what was happening somewhere on Pangu continent at any time. At the moment, Wu Qi was communicating with the light screen with his divine sense, focusing his attention on the sky above Liangzhu. The image of Liangzhu appeared in the light screen, which had expanded to about a mile in circumference. Nearly 100 supreme towers could be seen hovering over the city, and the imperial palace was densely packed with soldiers. Countless civil and military officials of Du were scurrying around the palace like ants on a hot pan, throwing the whole city into chaos. Some supreme oracles had set up altars on the surrounding mountains, trying to activate some restrictive spells to conceal the city, but nothing could escape the surveillance of the Pangu's map. After all, Liangzhu was built in the middle of Yuxiong Plain, which was said to be the great Saint Pangu's heart. So, all the defensive spells in the city were laid out with the infinite energy of Yuxiong Plain. The special terrain determined that Liangzhu city had no defensive power in front of Pangu's map. It was like a giant trying to see the lines on his palm. How could a few germs stop a giant from doing that? While, Qi's Wu Qi's book, Tian Nation's Qi, who of nation of Pi Pu Ping, Shan, mountain, Yu, spirit of the Ling, the Wu of mountain of, King Wu Long Long's mountain, Ming Dynasty, Tian, County, Muhua, Yu, Ling, who Wu you of? While drinking, Great Horns laughed and said, "What a great treasure! It can see everything in and out of Liangzhu clearly. Tisk, it's indeed a great treasure." Then, he looked at Wu Qi in confusion and said, "But, why did you take this thing?" "It's an extraordinary treasure given to the human emperor by the Wahuang clan to monitor the whole Panga continent. Now that you've taken it, the Wahuang clan will come after you in the future." Wu Qi smiled indifferently. The Wahuang clan was trapped in her house by the 7 old monks, and by the time she came to settle the score with Wu Qi, the storm would have long passed. By then, Wu Qi would have successfully fused with the Tao, and he would not be afraid even if the Wahuang clan resorted to violence. Besides, he did not take the treasure to attack the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. What excuse did the Wahuang clan have to come after him? As he touched the Panga's map with his finger, colorful ripples spread across the colorful light screen. Wu Qi told Great Horns and Yao Ling why he had taken the treasure, to refine an extraordinary treasure that could monitor all living beings on Panga continent. Once they died, their souls would be forcibly sucked into the treasure, and a passage would be built inside it that led directly to the 6 paths of reincarnation. Once the souls were sucked in, they would be sent directly into the 6 paths of reincarnation, and there would be no chance for them to become deities. Great Horns' eyes gleamed as he listened, while Yao Ling twisted her waist excitedly, causing her 100-mile-long dress to flutter like a cheerful bird. The means by which the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs became deities was nothing more than an extraordinary treasure that could suck in the souls of suitable people. Like Wu Qi's idea, the treasure could monitor the entire Panga continent, and once a suitable person died, their souls would be immediately sucked in and stored in the treasure, waiting to be conferred deities. It was conceivable that the souls of those who died would be strictly screened, and only those who were inclined to the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, or those who had some special bloodlines would be sucked in. Needless to say, those who were inclined to the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League were conferred as Celestial Lords, which was in their best interest. But for those with special bloodlines, that was because some ancient stars could only be better fused with their natal star power by possessing unique bloodlines. If it were an ordinary bloodline, it would be impossible for them to mobilize its full power. So what was the point of being conferred as Celestial Lords? It would be a great victory for the Holy Alliance if they could take away half of the deities reserved by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Great Horns rubbed his palms excitedly. He threw his head back and roared a few times, then turned to stare at Wu Qi and asked, "How do I craft this thing?" Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled confidently. "Don't forget what I'm famous for among the Chaos Fiend gods. I may not be as good as you in other fields, but when it comes to artifact crafting and pill concocting, those few old fellows can probably be a match for me, right?" In terms of artifact crafting, even after so many years, Wu Qi was still confident that he could beat the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. They had established sects and worked hard to expand their power. In other words, they did not have much time to study an unorthodox art. They were all Tao fusing experts, which meant that they had spent all their efforts in studying the heavenly Tao and cultivating their foundations over the years, and they did not have much time to waste on an unorthodox art such as artifact crafting. Therefore, Wu Qi was confident that he could craft the Panga's map into a powerful artifact that was more powerful than the artifacts in the hands of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. He could even figure out what they had used to craft the artifacts they had now. The cosmic mirror of rivers and rivers of the Celestial Court was also a spirit artifact that could allow them to see the entire Panga continent in an instant. They must have used it as the foundation to craft the artifacts. Compared to the Panga's map, the cosmic mirror of rivers and rivers of the Panga's map was still an exotic artifact, and it was not as effective as the former in patrolling Panga continent. On top of that, Wu Qi's artifact crafting technique was better than the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. As long as there was a powerful figure presiding over it, Wu Qi was confident that he could make them vomit blood with anger. Great Horns and Yao Ling's eyes gleamed with excitement as they listened to Wu Qi's explanation. They immediately tore open the void and roared a few times. Before long, Wu Divinity, Lord Chengmu, and Lord Wuling, the 3 Tao fusing experts, arrived as well. After hearing the news, the Universal Light God Lord, whose body was made of countless red light balls that gathered and scattered like a group of fireflies, rushed over after hearing the news. The beautiful woman, Green Lady, who rode a 100-legged beetle the other day, also rushed over after a quarter of an hour. Following closely behind her was Old Cloud Lord, whose body was made of the first strand of cloud in the innate world. The last to join in the fun was Lord of Light, who had a bull's head and a human body, with a long, sharp horn growing out of every vertebra from his neck to his tailbone. These people had different lives, but they were all supreme existences in the realm of Tao fusing, and they were unrestrained people who loved freedom. The other members of the Covenant Alliance were setting up some means to target the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League in other places, so they were the only ones who could come now. As the reincarnation of Yuan Ling, the #1 chaos fiend god in alchemy and artifact crafting, Wu Qi told everyone his plan. The group of almighty experts clapped and laughed happily, saying that it was the best way to deal with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. They wanted to choose the right people to sacrifice and send their souls to the deification realm to strengthen the Tao League and the Buddhist League. If that was the case, they would take drastic measures to ruin their plan. In particular, Lunyang, who was riding on a 100-legged beetle, promised Wu Qi that if he could really refine the Pangu's map into a suitable treasure, she would explain the matter to the Wahuang clan afterward, and she would certainly not let the Wahuang clan cause trouble for Wu Qi. Yao Ling also made the same promise. After all, as one of the few women among the Tao fusing experts, they had a good relationship with the Wahuang clan, so it was not a big deal for them to come forward and ask for a favor. After getting their assurance, Wu Qi put down the last bit of worry in his heart, and began to make a thorough arrangement. To refine the treasure in Wu Qi's mind, the Pangu's map alone was not enough as the main material. He needed countless other auxiliary materials, all of which were extremely rare innate divine objects. It took Wu Qi 3 days and 3 nights to come up with a list of all the materials that he could possibly use, and those that he had to use. What surprised Wu Qi was that they were worthy of being experts of the Tao fusing realm. Although Great Horns and the others knew nothing about artifact refinement and pill concoction, as supreme existences of the Tao fusing realm and standing at the pinnacle of Pangu continent, they had collected countless materials over the years and carried them with them. He had been worried that he would not be able to gather all the materials, but with just the private collections of Great Horns, Yao Ling, and Duke Wuling, he had gathered all the materials Wu Qi needed. Wu Qi did not stand on ceremony. He immediately asked for a lot of natural treasures that they could not use but were of great use to Wu Qi, and these people generously emptied their inventories and gave them to Wu Qi. After all, Great Horns and the others knew that these things were just decorations in their hands, but when they were in Wu Qi's hands, only God knew what he could make out of them. A direct conflict with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs was likely to break out in the future, and perhaps an extra innate spirit artifact would give them a better chance of winning. With these materials in hand, Wu Qi gathered the people present and ordered them to breathe out their natal true flames. With the help of their flames and his Yuan Ling true flame, Wu Qi released the Pangu's map into the heaven refining cauldron. Everyone's natal true flames melted into a purple flame that looked like a crystal, and Wu Qi carefully put it into the cauldron. Dark Yin Celestial Tower flew up from the top of Wu Qi's head, and the time around him suddenly sped up by 100,000 times. Great Horns and the others casually cast a beam of light at Wu Qi's Dark Yin Celestial Tower, speeding up the time by 1,000,000 times, so much so that Wu Qi almost could not get used to it. After a moment of suffocation, Wu Qi finally got used to it, and he devoted all his mind to the cauldron. Chapter 978. The Ling dynasty obediently withdrew all its forces from the attack on the East Sea, and Princess Zhonglu did not want to waste her forces by stirring up disputes. Every day, she was busy restraining Yi Xia, preventing her from stirring up trouble. The nature of shapeless heavenly devil was to kill, rob, and stir up trouble. An ordinary life was not suitable for a fiend ancestor like Yi Xia. Chu Ping smiled lightly and said, "How about this? How many points are the heads of the emperors of the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty, the heads of their civil and military officials, the heads of their ordinary soldiers, and the immortals of the Celestial Court and the monks of the Buddhist League?" Their cultivation bases are not equal, and they are worth a lot of points. Let's record the total number of points one by one, and meet again in the future, and the one with the highest total number of points will be the winner. What do you say? Princess Xianglu had distributed countless armaments and provisions to the 6 dynasties. Even Xiang Yu and Hu Hai, the 2 generals that Wu Qi had focused on training, were allowed to return to their respective dynasties. After a busy day, the 6 dynasties quietly left the territory of the East Sea. De Yu was shocked, but he did not take it seriously. Da Qin, Great Chu, Great Yan, Great Zhao, Great Qi, and Great Wei. Who knew where these small human kingdoms came from? De Yu had too many things to worry about now, so he did not care about the disputes of these small kingdoms. If the 6 dynasties had done this, it would have been a little suspicious of tearing down the East Sea. But now, the emperors of the 6 dynasties could be considered as Wu Qi's father-in-law, and even the civil and military officials of the 6 dynasties were 100% Wu Qi's father-in-law. If they wanted to lead their soldiers and people out of the East Sea to rebuild their power, there was nothing to argue about. While Princess Xianglu was busy, on the summit of a high mountain outside the East Sea city, in the temporary imperial residence of the Qin Emperor Yingzheng, the emperors of the 6 states were sitting around a round table. In front of each of them was a small gilded lacquer plate, on which were exquisite wine pots and wine cups, as well as a few exquisite dishes to go with the wine. Chu Ping raised his brows, Yan Dan rolled his eyes, Tian Wen and Zhao Xing did not say anything, while Wei Wuji, the toughest and most combative of them all, gave a hideous laugh, stared at Yingzheng and said, "Yingzheng, what do you mean by that? If you want to be a beast, then go, but don't drag us down with you." Yingzheng nodded slowly. He gave the people around the round table a look, sighed and said, "In those days when Daqin unified the 6 states, it is a pity that I could not kill all the emperors with my own hands." He swept the small lacquer plate in front of him to the ground, smiled proudly and said, "But, it is true that I do not have the intention to kill you today, but..." Yingzheng, Chu Ping, Yan Dan, Wei Wuji, Tian Wen, Zhao Sheng, and the emperors of 6 states were drinking and enjoying the peach blossom forest outside the hall through the open floor-to-ceiling window. Yingzheng had chosen a good place to build his temporary imperial residence. The climate of this peach blossom forest was at least 10,000 years old. The trunks of the trees were twisted like dragons, and the branches were as hard as steel. The few leaves on the trees were lined with large peach blossoms with red petals and green pistils. The peach blossoms on the trees looked like they were on fire, dyeing the entire mountain red. With a slurping sound, Yingzheng tipped the wine pot over, sucked the last drop of wine into his mouth, and gave the pot a strong shake to make sure that there was no more wine left in it. He put down the wine pot, lightly tapped the round table with his finger, and suddenly breathed out a long sigh and said, "What a wonderful time, beautiful scenery, fine wine, and delicious food. Life is like raising a pig, and you and I are both animals." Yi Xia laughed. She sat down excitedly at the round table and began discussing the details of the bet with the 6 crafty emperors. As for the sudden haunting in East Sea City, where people stripped naked and ran wildly around the city in broad daylight, or some other strange things, these were, of course, the little tricks that Yi Xia came up with out of boredom. Invisible Heavenly Fiend had such a nasty character, and what could you do to her? Princess Xianglu could only spend her days putting out fires, which made her look haggard and haggard. Yingzheng, who was waving his arms and legs excitedly, sprung to his feet and cried out in a stern voice, "She has won the bet. Your Majesties are all heroes, so why can't we? Even those who are ordered around like dogs dare to fight for the human emperor, so why can't we? Your Majesties, in the past, the strength of the 6 states was weak, and we had to seek refuge in the East Sea. But today, we are strong and have fought many wars for the East Sea, so we have repaid the favor." Wei Wuji laughed and said, "When have the soldiers of Wei ever been any weaker than Great Zhao?" Yan Dan grabbed the wine pot and poured himself some wine, but it suddenly turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in his palm. "Since we entered the East Sea, life has indeed become much more peaceful," Yan Dan said with a sigh. If it were not for the fact that Princess Xianglu could still control Xia, she would have long been in cahoots with Catfish and the other ferocious fiends under Wu Qi's command, and gone to harm the Ling dynasty. King Yangshan knew that those who came with good intentions would not come with good intentions. The fact that the 6 states had openly flashed their banners proved that their overall strength could not be underestimated. Xia's eyes flickered with an amused but dangerous gleam. Ying Zheng and the others exchanged a glance, then suddenly burst out laughing and said, "That's good, that's the best. Since Miss Xia has said so, what else do we have to say?" Ying Zheng shook his head and sighed. "I thought all of you had been raised into fat pigs by the comfortable life in the East Sea." Hee hee, hee hee, hee hee hee. After laughing for a while, Ying Zheng gently tapped the round table with his fingers, then looked up at the sky and sighed. "We have more than 100 million soldiers and countless people. Do you still remember who you are? We are the monarchs of the 6 states, the mighty lords of the warring states." Yan Dan stuck out his chest and said proudly, "I'm afraid we can't kill each other now. So, let's use those pigs and dogs to decide who is the winner. Whoever can take the heads of the emperors of the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty will be the winner. What do you think, your majesties?" As the sea breeze blew, flower petals drifted down with the wind and turned into red tornadoes that soared into the sky. The scenery was indescribable, and only those who were in it could understand its soul-stirring charm. But the 6 men sitting in the hall were all resolute, and could even be considered cold and indifferent. They just watched the beautiful scenery quietly, and no one said a word. There was no war in the East Sea. Ying Zheng gave Wei Wuji a sidelong glance and said with a cold grin, "TSK, you still have a temper." "Why don't I have a temper?" Wei Wuji said proudly and coldly. Princess Xianglu was happy to see this. She generously divided the huge army in the East Sea into 7 equal parts, and gave each of the 6 states 1/7 of the army. Moreover, Princess Xianglu also promised that as long as the 6 states needed it, the new soldiers trained in the East Sea would be given priority to the 6 states. Ying Zheng let out a long and loud laugh and said, "That's great. Who do you think that Zhang Tingyan is? In my opinion, he is nothing but a foppish man who is worse than a pig or a dog. How dare he covet the throne of the human emperor? If your majesties have the heart, let us lead the army of the 6 states and turn Pangu continent upside down." Now that Princess Xianglu was in charge, Xia had no place to go, so she could only focus all her energy on harming the soldiers in the East Sea. She had hundreds of millions of incarnations, trained these soldiers with the cruelest means, and then tortured and killed them in their dreams. She had tortured the latest batch of soldiers in the East Sea until they were as crazy as lunatics, but their fighting strength was indeed 50% stronger than that of ordinary soldiers of the same cultivation base, which left Princess Xianglu speechless. "The army of Great Qi is ready," said Tianwen coolly. The 6 men laughed and clapped in unison, and were about to clap their hands to make the agreement. On behalf of Wu Qi, Xia made a bet with the emperors of the 6 states. They had calculated in detail how many points each person from the Ling dynasty, the Shizhou dynasty, the Celestial Court, the Buddhist League, and other human states were worth, how many points they would get if they were killed, and how many points they would get if they were captured alive. After that, they all swore that they would never cheat in the bet. After the bet was made, the matter of the 6 states leaving the East Sea and setting up their own states was settled. A faint, fierce aura spread out from the bodies of Yan Dan and the others. Some people in the East Sea city happened to be looking at the mountain on this side. They were shocked to find that, starting from the top of the mountain, the peach blossoms all over the mountain were withering, and the once red mountain had suddenly turned a dead gray. All the life force of the peach trees was gone, and even the grass under them had died. All of a sudden, a colorful light flickered on the round table, and Xia abruptly appeared in front of the 6 men. She rolled her eyes and gave the 6 men a glance. Suddenly, she laughed evilly and said, "Why is there no position for Xia in this fun event? How about adding the East Sea? If Xia wins the East Sea in the end, all of you will willingly serve him as the human emperor. What do you think?" These dishes were exquisitely prepared, and the ingredients used were the most precious and delicious ingredients from the bodies of the mountain spirits and aquatic monsters. For example, one of the dishes, the carp whiskers in cold sauce, was made from the spirit of a 1,000-year-old carp, which had cultivated into the nascent soul realm. Not only were the whiskers of the carp crisp and tasty, but they also had the effect of calming the mind and strengthening the physique. If it had not been for the large army of aquatic demons in the East Sea, how could ordinary people have such a good meal? The army of the 6 states was going to leave the East Sea and re-establish themselves. It was a very complicated issue, involving the division of the soldiers and the migration of the people in the East Sea, as well as the need to replenish the 6 states with all kinds of armaments, salaries, rations, and countless other materials. Wei Wuji clapped his hands and praised, "Wonderful. Let's do it this way." Whoever gets the highest total score will be wholeheartedly supported by the others to become the human emperor and unify the Panga continent. What do you think of this idea, your majesties? However, the after effect of Xia's training of the new soldiers was that there were 67 camp howls in just 1 month in the East Sea. In the chaos, tens of thousands of soldiers were seriously injured, countless others were lightly wounded, and the frenzied soldiers nearly destroyed half of the East Sea city. That was all. This was the price of raising the overall strength of the soldiers trained by Xia by 50%. Yingzheng fixed his eyes on Yan Dan and said, "Yan Dan, what do you think we should do?" King Yangshan, on the other hand, nearly fainted again. Staring coldly at Yingzheng, Yan Dan sighed and said, "I still remember that I sent Jing Ke to assassinate my eldest brother, but I failed to kill him. What a regret." 3 months later, the banners of the 6 states were raised at the same time in the northern region of Diyu. Chu Ping narrowed his eyes and tucked his hands under his sleeves. Suddenly, he cried out in a long voice, "I have come to Panga continent, but if I have to live under the protection of the East Sea for the rest of my life, I will be lonely. Chu Ping may like to recite romantic songs, but I prefer to lead the mighty army of Great Chu to fight the world." Zhao Xing slowly straightened his back and said with a chuckle, "The cavalry of Great Zhao is ready to go." Over the years, with the resources of the East Sea, Great Zhao has flourished, and now has trillions of people and over 100 million mighty soldiers, all of whom are heavily armed and elite cavalry. Chapter 979. Wu Qi was still crafting items in Great Horns' lair, while Princess Xianglu and Xia were working hard to train the new army. The 6 dynasties had taken away 6 out of 7 of the East Sea's military forces, and now, the East Sea's military force was a little stretched, not even enough to maintain a regular garrison. Fortunately, the Ling dynasty had pulled back its forces and dared not to go all out against the East Sea. Princess Xianglu had only maintained a regular garrison on the border, while the rest of the cities and military towns were basically planted with fake banners and flags. New soldiers were still being trained in the underground spirit cave, and the shortage of military forces in the East Sea would soon be solved. But on the border of Diyu, the 6 dynasties had set off a frenzy. Whether it was Diyu, the Ling dynasty, or the Shizhou dynasty, they were all suffering because of them. With enough troops and top-notch experts, the 6 dynasties had returned to their original appearance as war monsters. Yan Dan stood on the top of a mountain. In front of him was an important military town set up by the Shizhou dynasty to guard against Diyu's attack. The town measured about 100 miles in both width and length, and its walls were densely covered with sharp alloy spikes. Any ordinary human soldier who touched them would have their limbs cut off immediately. 2 million people were stationed in the town, and all of them were soldiers. Apart from a few women who provided the soldiers with their physical needs, there was not a single civilian in the huge town. Across from the town was Liang Province, a 9th-grade province in the northwestern frontier of Diyu. With a population of less than 10 million, Liang Province was suffocated by this military town. From time to time, civilian women were abducted by the Shizhou dynasty soldiers in the town. The prefecture overseer of Liang had repeatedly asked Diyu for reinforcements, but Diyu, who was busy pacifying the southern region, did not have any extra troops to send here. But recently, GAO had stationed 200,000 soldiers of the Flying Bear Army here, completely suppressing the arrogance of this military town. The Shizou dynasty soldiers no longer dared to go out at will, for fear of running into the scouts of the Flying Bear Army. After all the soldiers of the Flying Bear Army were at least in the Panga Heaven Realm, and over 90% of the soldiers in this military town were at the first Panga Heaven Realm. Therefore, they did not have the courage to fight against the Flying Bear Army. Only with the help of the freakishly solid city wall and the powerful defense mechanism of the military town managed to resist the attacks of the Flying Bear Army. Looking at the military town ahead, Yan Dan smiled and nodded to Han Fei, who was standing beside him. Han Fei, it's up to you now. Han Fei smiled warmly. He pulled out a 3-feet-long writing brush, which was as thick as a baby's arm, and drew a line in the air while growling in a low voice, "Words are the law. Activate." As Han Fei's voice rang out, the freakishly tall city wall of the town suddenly collapsed. A bottomless crack, hundreds of miles long and a mile wide, appeared on the ground, splitting the town into 2 halves from the middle. Hundreds of black-clad oracles of Great Yen stood halfway up the mountain, raising both hands at the same time. Large clouds of dark clouds shot out from their palms, turning into a dense dark cloud that spread toward the military town. Han Fei's earth-shattering attack just now had shaken the millions of soldiers in the city, and even the few Shizou dynasty supreme oracles could not react in time. The dark cloud enveloped the military town, and a strange aroma with a fishy smell slowly spread out. Everyone, including the few supreme oracles, swayed and fell to the ground, unconscious. The dark cloud was made with a secret recipe of the East Sea, using the pollen of the horned snake rattan, collected from Yuanling's nether realm as the main ingredient. Its effect was 10 times stronger than the drunken dragon incense recorded in the Scroll of Stealing. After all, Yuanling's skill in concocting pills was much better than that white mouse's. The soldiers in the city were defeated without a fight, and the army of Great Yen charged in and captured all the soldiers. In just 1 month, Great Yen had conquered 36 cities and 127 military towns of the Shizou dynasty, shocking the imperial court of the Shizou dynasty. While Great Yen was attacking the cities, Wei Wuji was personally leading 300,000 soldiers of Great Yen to attack the capital of a human kingdom. The garrison was also 300,000 soldiers, and Wei Wuji had also sent out 300,000 soldiers to attack the city. Logically speaking, Wei Wuji was sending his soldiers to their deaths. But, they were worthy of being the soldiers of Great Wei who had dominated the Warring States period. Naked from the waist up and wearing only a pair of trousers, the soldiers launched a tidal wave of attacks at the garrison on the city wall. They did not know pain, did not know how to dodge, and did not know fear. Under Wei Wuji's personal supervision, they only knew how to climb the ladders desperately to the top of the city. The guards on top of the city wall were terrified as they fought against these Wei Wuzu who were like mad tigers. They were killed one by one, and their heads were hung on the belts of the Wei Wuzu as trophies of war. Blood flowed down from the bodies of the crazy Wei Wuzu, dyeing them red. In just an hour, the morale of the garrison collapsed, and the soldiers threw down their weapons and fled in all directions. 300,000 Wei soldiers roared as they charged into the city, killing all the defending soldiers. The emperor of the kingdom knelt before Wei Wuji in horror and begged to surrender, but he was beheaded by Wei Wuji with a sword. Laughing wildly, Wei Wuji gave the emperor's most beautiful concubine to the soldier of Great Yen who was the first to rush into the city, then sat on the high throne with the emperor's beautiful queen in his arms. On the southeast side of the city that was attacked by the Great Wei, a fierce battle broke out. On the grassland that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, the 100,000 great Zhao infantrymen under Zhao Xing's command were surrounded by an enemy army that was 10 times their size. The grassland was empty, and there was no place for them to defend. The sky was filled with arrows, and the soldiers under Zhao Xing's command were riddled with holes. Riding on his mount, the enemy's general laughed wildly. He waved his sword and ordered the soldiers to attack with all their might. He wanted to kill all the 100,000 soldiers of Zhao Xing. He wanted to cut off Zhao Xing's head, make his skull into a fine wine vessel, and offer it to his emperor. The battle lasted for 6 hours. Besieged by superior forces, Zhao Xing's army was almost crushed several times. Just when the soldiers around Zhao Sheng were about to lose the enemy's attack, a total of 10 teams of cavalry came roaring in from all directions. Each team had only 10,000 soldiers, but they were all riding huge and ferocious demon beasts, plunging into the enemy's formation like 10 steel blades. With just one thrust, the army of 1,000,000 soldiers was cut into dozens of fragmented formations that could not be connected at all. White-haired and white-bearded Lien Pe, clad in a heavy armor, laughed wildly as he wielded his long blade and spurred his mount forward like a flaming cloud. From a distance of over 10,000 feet, he unleashed a beam of blade energy, slicing the commander into two right in the middle. Thousands of soldiers were killed by this single attack, both in front and behind him. Li Mu, who was leading another group of cavalrymen, snorted angrily and glared at Lien Pe, venting all his anger on someone else. Sword beams rained down like rain as he swung his sword again and again, sending heads flying into the sky wherever he passed. In a flash, he had killed more than 10,000 soldiers, and the enemy soldiers were so frightened that they bowed to him and lost their will to fight. Zhao Sheng raised his sword and laughed wildly. His laughter frightened the millions of soldiers, who knelt to the ground and begged for their lives. On the other side of the battlefield, the ground in front of Baichi was littered with corpses as more than 1,000,000 soldiers were slaughtered. Su Fu, whose face was purple with excitement, danced and recited a spell, calling Lei Meng's real name silently. An enormous electric current fell from the sky, and Lei Meng was satisfied with the death of 1,000,000 soldiers. Then, a huge beam of red light fell, and 50% of it fell into Baichi's body. Shrouded in a bloody mist, Baichi suddenly raised his sword. The soldiers of Daqin, who were also shrouded in a bloody light, threw their heads back and roared like wild beasts, their killing intent shaking the surroundings. Meanwhile, in the capital city of another kingdom not far from this bloody battlefield, an emperor was howling in pain. His entire body was ablaze with ghostly fire, and he was struggling and twitching on the ground in pain, looking at the few most authoritative ministers in his court in confusion. Li Si walked out from behind the curtain next to the throne with a sinister smile on his face. He cupped his fist at the ministers and said, "Congratulations, everyone. You and I are now ministers of the same dynasty, and I hope you will take care of me in the future. His Majesty will reward you handsomely for abandoning the dark side and joining Daqin." Without shedding a drop of blood, Li Si had overthrown the kingdom in one fell swoop. Only the emperor had died unjustly, not knowing why his ministers had poisoned him. Far away from the kingdom Li Si had overthrown, two kingdoms were engaged in their final battle. Both sides had mobilized the last of their armies, from the generals of the second Panga heaven to the ordinary soldiers of the first Panga heaven, to the lowly slave soldiers and slave soldiers, and even the ordinary strong men were sent to the battlefield. More than 1,000,000 regular armies had been gathered on both sides, and the number of cannon fodder soldiers was uncountable. The war, which had lasted for more than a year, had exhausted both sides. They were looking for the flaws of the other side, preparing to launch the final and most deadly blow to the enemy. However, a deafening rumble was heard as a few great rivers in the vicinity rolled up huge waves. Countless huge beasts were seen galloping on top of the waves. Tian Dan and Tian Ji led countless soldiers of Qi state and charged towards them. The soldiers of both states were completely annihilated. Traveling eastward along the Great River, the great army of the Ling dynasty, which was sweeping westward in the northern region, was running wildly in the mountains and forests. Everywhere was shrouded in mist, ghostly shadows could be seen, and the melodious singing of mountain ghosts could be heard. The gentle voice often attracted the soldiers of the Ling dynasty into the mountains and forests, and they never showed up again. From time to time, hailstones would fall from the sky, smashing the soldiers' heads and making them bleed. Occasionally, a thunderbolt would fall from the clear sky and burn many soldiers to a crisp. Swamps would emerge out of nowhere from the plains, quicksand, seas of fire, and countless traps of poisonous insects. The army of the Ling dynasty, which had a scale of 1,000,000 soldiers, was like a big apple, being peeled layer by layer, becoming smaller and smaller. And, the man who did this was Chu Ping's son, the crown prince of Great Chu, Chu Ying. He had summoned countless mountain ghosts and Yin deities to construct the formation of Pantheon. The army of 1 million soldiers of the Ling dynasty, together with the several tens of thousands of oracles who followed them, were trapped and killed by the formation. None of them could walk out of the forest of death. Outside the forest, Chu Ping had summoned a giant ghost that stood 1,000 miles tall. With a gentle palm strike, he lifted the wall of a great city of the Ling dynasty, then brought the mighty army of Xiang Yu and rushed into the city. A towering blood-red light towered into the sky. The movement of the 6 dynasties shocked the world. Wherever the army of the 6 dynasties pointed, the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty were all helpless, and all the kingdoms in the outer heavenly realms trembled with fear. In just 3 years, the territory of the 6 dynasties had expanded tremendously, and when their territories were joined together, they had nearly occupied the entire northern region of Diyu. Chapter 980. In the center of Calmheart City was a cluster of ancient wooden buildings. This was the most prosperous business and entertainment circle in the city. Although the dynasty was founded with the will of Buddha, the Shizhou dynasty did not abandon the normal business activities. The people of the Shizhou dynasty only had fewer distracting thoughts than others, and they had all kinds of emotions and desires. In this cluster of wooden buildings, there were at least over 100 brothels of extremely high quality, and all the people who came and went here were rich and powerful. Without enough wealth, no one dared to take a step into this place. In a private room on the 3rd floor of a restaurant named White Lotus Puri, Jing Kuo was sitting at a table with a golden blade. While drinking, he grabbed large chunks of beef that looked like snowflakes and shoved them into his mouth. In just one meal, he had drunk 30 jars of fine wine and eaten 15 kilograms of beef. While laughing and drinking, he kept yelling about how happy he was. Some people on the street recognized this man. They put their palms together and bowed to him, saying, "Merciful Buddha." "Greetings, Your Majesty." Qin Wuyang gave a hideous laugh as he slowly stroked the wine cup in his palm. Soon, half a cup of fine wine melted into wisps of white smoke and dissipated in the air. The wheel was blasted to pieces by the thunderbolts, and the thunderbolts struck Emperor Wugo's body. Ouch! Emperor Wugo howled miserably as he was knocked flying hundreds of feet away with black smoke rising from his body. More than half of his body was burned by the thunderbolts, and he barely managed to stay alive by relying on his prime Zen power. Compared to the incomparably luxurious and extravagant capital city of the Ling dynasty, Calmheart City truly lived up to its name. The city was surrounded by a city wall that measured 1,000 miles in both width and length. Clear water bodies could be found everywhere in the city, and small streams and rivers could be found everywhere. Springs and ponds could be found everywhere, and there were also quite a number of deep lakes and ponds. Next to the streams was a pure Bodhi tree, its green leaves edged with a faint golden hue. As the breeze blew past, the whole city was filled with golden-green waves. Emperor Wugo nodded and said with a smile, "If you have something to discuss with me, Recluse Zhang should go to the imperial palace." Sovereign Wugo nodded slightly, then said with a smile, as Benefactor Zhang said, "Please." Very gracefully, Sovereign Wugo extended his right hand and made a gesture of invitation. Jing Ke snorted coldly, then said in an indifferent tone, "I'll go talk to this bald donkey. Wu Yang, you stay behind and provide support. If something goes wrong, just use the life-saving spirit talisman crafted by Wu Qi himself and smash him to death." Zhang Yi smiled. He shook his head and said, "I have come this time to discuss the future of Daqin and the Shizhou dynasty with Your Majesty." Zhang Yi squinted his eyes and smiled like a fox. "It's very simple. The Shizhou dynasty will provide the money and goods, and I, the Daqin kingdom, will dispatch the army to attack the Ling dynasty. This is the best of both worlds. Of course, Daqin kingdom has lost too many soldiers, so the compensation will be slightly more expensive." Gently, Jing Ke placed the wine jar on the table, opened his mouth and sprayed out a stream of white mist. All the tipsiness in his body was expelled. He rose to his feet steadily, turned his body sideways and stood next to the open window, looking into the distance. Zhang Yi thought for a moment, then bowed to Emperor Wugo and said, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty, and allow me to demonstrate to you what I, the Daqin kingdom, can do." Qin Wuyang sat on a seat next to the window, hiding half of his face behind the window out of habit as he quietly watched the passers-by outside. In his hand was a wine cup the size of a child's fist, half filled with fine wine. From time to time, he raised the cup and sniffed the aroma of the wine, but he did not touch a drop. Zhang Yi sighed, shook his head helplessly, and said, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. I dare not go." Emperor Wugo thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Please tell me, Benefactor Zhang. Why have you come to see me?" Jing Ku's fingers twitched as he cursed in a low voice, "Why is that old bastard Zhang Yi here? When it comes to fighting, I can beat 3 of him. When it comes to playing with words, 30 of you and me together are not as good as 1 of him. We are in big trouble now." Zhang Yi clapped his hands and said, "Indeed, Your Majesty is wise." Jing Ku smiled coldly. Qin Wuyang chuckled and said in a low voice, "What a pretentious bald donkey. Ha, he prays and salutes everyone he sees. He is so pretentious all day long. How could he have the time to deal with the affairs of the Shizo dynasty?" Even the current emperor of the Shizo dynasty, Emperor Wugo, dressed like a monk, often wearing a linen kasaya as he wandered around Calming Heart City. No man or woman, old or young, needed to kneel and salute when they saw him. Everyone and Emperor Wugo would put their palms together and chant the name of Buddha as a form of etiquette. Emperor Wugo exhaled a mouthful of dark smoke, his body shivering as he asked, "May I ask Your Majesty Daqin, what is your opinion on the future of the Shizo dynasty and Daqin?" The middle-aged woman was beaming with joy, bowing and thanking him repeatedly. The little boy bowed and saluted Emperor Wugo as well. Emperor Wugo laughed, then handed the string of pale purple Buddhist beads in his hand, which was obviously not an ordinary item, to the little boy. "It is fate that brought us together to meet. This item will accompany me through 3 reincarnations. Keep it well. When you are able to comprehend something from it, come and find me in the palace." A young man, who stood 9 feet tall and had a jade-like face, was walking towards Emperor Wugo with a smile on his face. He was wearing a yellowish linen kasaya, with a string of pale purple Buddhist beads on his left hand. He was walking towards Emperor Wugo while stepping on a lotus flower in a pond. The lotus flowers in the pond were not densely packed. Every 3 to 5 feet, there would be a blooming flower. However, with every step he took, he just happened to step on the pistils of the flowers, and as light as a feather, he came to the busiest business circle of Calming Heart City. Zhang Yi gave a graceful smile, nodded his head, and said, "Your Majesty, please don't laugh at me. I, Zhang Yi, am just a common man in the mortal world, always running around like a fly for personal gain. I am not worthy of Your Majesty's praise." He paused for a brief moment, then said in a deep voice, "The reason why the Emperor of Daqin, Ingzheng, has sent me to Calming Heart City is that I have something to discuss with Your Majesty." Qin Wuyang nodded his head excitedly. With a crooked finger, a small and exquisite dagger appeared in his hand. The young man smiled and bowed back to the man. A middle-aged woman walked past, pulling a little boy with her. The woman put her palms together and bowed, while the little boy looked at her and laughed. Emperor Wugo smiled and nodded his head, then gently pressed his palm on the boy's head and said, "You are happy to see the Buddha. This young man has a great affinity with the Buddha, and his future is limitless. Congratulations, my lady benefactor, your family is blessed." Jing Ku narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "If it were not for the fact that our purpose of coming here is not to kill him, I would actually try to kill him. Even if he is the reincarnation of the Buddha, I still have many ways to destroy his soul and scatter his soul." Some even addressed the man as Reverend Wugo. Apparently, they did not regard him as the monarch of a dynasty, but respected him as an eminent monk. Emperor Wugo put his palms together and bowed to Zhang Yi smilingly, then said, "Since you are here, you are my guest. Daqin, Daqin. Could it be that you are the Daqin who has conquered over 800 cities and towns of the Ling dynasty in the past 2 years?" Zhang Yi stroked his beard and said with a smile, "The Daqin mentioned by Your Majesty is exactly where I came from. Without hesitation, Zhang Yi took out a spirit talisman personally drawn by Wu Qi, crafted using the leaf of an innate divine tree found in Yuanling's nether realm. With a shake of his hand, he sent a stream of energy into the talisman, activating the Three Corpses Explosive Thunder Talisman, which was drawn by Wu Qi with his natal energy. After giving a few words of advice to the little boy, Emperor Wugo flicked his sleeve and walked slowly towards White Lotus Purang. A peddler selling tea on the side of the road offered him a bowl of green tea. Emperor Wugo hurriedly took the cup and drained it in one gulp. After that, he solemnly bowed to the peddler and expressed his gratitude, then began to recite a long prayer scripture for him. Emperor Wugo smiled faintly. A ring of Buddhist light shone from behind his head, illuminating the entire Calmheart city. Chanting rose from all directions, and a fragrant mist rose in spirals, intoxicating everyone. Hundreds of Buddha figures emerged from the Calmheart pagoda, while a vast power of Buddhist Zen swept across the sky. Zhang Yi's body stiffened slightly, and he was nearly knocked away by the surging power of Zen. A loud boom rang out in the sky. Countless fireballs, measuring about 1 mile in circumference, rained down from the sky like broken charcoals, shattering the defensive mechanisms around Calmheart city. 3 thumb-sized thunderbolts of purple, red, and blue intertwined with each other as they plunged down from the sky, smashing straight onto Emperor Wugo's forehead. A Vajra wheel of Buddhist League, with 3 layers inside and outside, had already shot out from between Emperor Wugo's brows, emitting beams of Buddhist light to protect his body. However, as the talisman drawn by Wu Qi with his cultivation base of Tao-breaking realm, its power was simply a cheat. Zhang Yi smiled, a very proud smile on his face. Emperor Wugo narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhang Yi. He nodded and said with a smile, "What Benefactor Zhang said is filled with Zen. Benefactor, you and Buddhist League are fated to meet." However, before Jing Ke could go downstairs to talk to Emperor Wugo, a handsome man clad in a long black robe and a tall hat made of black jade had already walked out from a brothel across the street. He bowed to Emperor Wugo in a very carefree and unhurried manner and said, "Zhang Yi, emissary of Daqin, greets your majesty." Just as Jing Ke's eyes were burning red from the alcohol, Qin Wuyang finally cried out in a low voice, "He's here." Emperor Wugo immediately burst into laughter. He beckoned at Zhang Yi, then sat down on the grass by the roadside and said, "Benefactor Zhang, you're telling the truth. Considering your background and purpose of coming here, could it be that you're afraid of being surrounded and killed after entering the imperial palace of the Shizo dynasty? The kingdom of the Shizo dynasty, Calmheart city." Emperor Wugo gave Zhang Yi a glance with a smile, then shook his head and said, "Benefactor Zhang, what talent does Daqin have? How could he possibly affect the future of the Shizo dynasty?" Zhang Yi clasped his hands behind his back and laughed proudly. However, Emperor Wugo rose to his feet, trembling as he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! Don't act recklessly. This is an honored guest of our dynasty. Quickly open the guest in and ask Benefactor Zhang to have a good rest." Even the imperial palace of the Shizo dynasty was like this. It was a small imperial palace that occupied an area of less than 1,000 acres. Rather than calling it an imperial palace, it would be better to call it a grand temple. Inside the temple was the tallest building in the entire Calmheart city, a Buddhist pagoda that stood 18 stories tall. This Buddhist pagoda was carved from a single piece of fine jade, and its surface was inlaid with countless precious pearls, relics, and other Buddhist treasures, as well as several tens of thousands of images of Buddhas. The name of this Buddhist pagoda was Calmheart Pagoda. It was a Buddhist magical artifact with incredible power, and it was also the core of the defensive mechanism of Calmheart city. A large sheet of auspicious light surged from all directions, as countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, clad in armors and holding weapons in their hands, angrily surrounded the pagoda. Chapter 981. When they saw Zhang Yi and Emperor Wugo talking intimately under the Bodhi tree that day, Jing Ke and Qin Wuyang immediately left Calmheart city with their men. Great Yan's plan of using the Shizo dynasty to fight against Yu did not work out, because Zhang Yi had already colluded with the Shizo dynasty. With his ruthlessness, it was estimated that the Shizo dynasty would have to pay a heavy price to satisfy Daqin's appetite. Under such circumstances, unless Emperor Wugo was out of his mind, he would not collude with a mere Great Yen to fight against Diyu for no reason. Naturally, the situation in the northern region of Diyu evolved into Diyu watching from the sidelines, while Great Yen, Great Chu, and Great Wei joined forces to attack the Shizhou dynasty, while Daqin, Great Qi, and Great Zhao joined forces to attack the Ling dynasty. Behind Great Yen, Great Chu, and Great Wei was the Ling dynasty. The Ling dynasty provided them with all kinds of armaments and resources at all costs, trying to weaken the Shizhou dynasty's strength. On the other hand, the three dynasties of Daqin had colluded with the Shizhou dynasty, arming themselves with the Shizhou dynasty's wealth and weakening the Ling dynasty's strength as much as possible. Both the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty had their wishful thinking. They had each hired three dynasties to tangle with each other, while their main forces were placed in the southern region. They swept across the southern region from east to west, trying to pacify it as soon as possible. All the outer heavenly realms had returned to Panga continent. The already vast continent had increased by half, and the speed at which it absorbed chaotic energy to expand itself had more than doubled. All the human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms and those in the northern region were shared among the six dynasties, leaving the southern region as the last chance for the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty to seize the population and that little bit of emperor aura. Although Wu Qi had drained the emperors from the outer realms of their sovereign qi, after a few years, they had more or less recovered. This bit of emperor's aura was of great help to Zhang Tingyun and Emperor Wugo. Both countries mobilized their armies in a frenzy to attack. Because of Wu Qi, the celestial court and the Buddhism showed signs of falling out. Both sides suspected that the other had plundered the Renhuang Qi of the outer domain, and they never suspected anyone else. The current situation on Panga continent was like a hurricane, and Diyu was right in the eye of it. It was calm for the time being, but sooner or later, he would be dragged into it. East, west, south, and north of Diyu were in full swing, and there were millions of casualties every day. Time flowed like water. Another year passed, and the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty finally destroyed all the human kingdoms that came from the outer realms. Just as they were preparing for a full-scale war in the southern region, the scouts of both sides discovered Great Wu at the same time. By now, Great Wu had become a behemoth. It alone occupied more than 30% of the southern region, had countless people, and had an enormous army. Although the cultivation base of Great Wu's soldiers was not as strong as the elites of the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty, the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty were shocked to find that Great Wu's city defenses were extremely brilliant, several times stronger than those of their own kingdoms. Moreover, with the help of countless powerful weapons, Great Wu was like an iron-shelled tortoise standing in front of the two dynasties. What made the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty even more uncomfortable was that, under Gigu Zi's deliberate influence, the situation in the southern region had changed extremely strangely. Great Wu occupied more than 30 to 40% of the southern region's land. To the west, the Shizhou dynasty occupied more than 20% of the southern region's land, to the east, the Ling dynasty occupied more than 20% of the land, and to the north, about 10% of the southern region's land controlled by Diyu. The territories of the four dynasties were not far from each other, and they formed an equidistant quadrilateral. Between the four dynasties was a vast grassland with a circumference of 1,000,000 miles, which could be used as a battlefield. Coincidentally, each of the four dynasties had built a large city on the edge of the grassland, behind which were countless strong city passes. To the north was the Diyu dynasty's Dingnan city, to the south was Great Wu's Iron Wall city, to the west was the Shizhou dynasty's Vajra city, and to the east was the Ling dynasty's Sky-Gazing city. Each of the four cities was 1,000 miles in circumference, garrisoned by countless soldiers, and densely packed with defensive mechanisms. The styles of the four cities were also very different. Dingnan city was simple and unadorned. It was a tall city built of boulders, ordinary and unadorned. Vajra city, on the other hand, had clear water, the same style as Kamhart city. There were countless monasteries in the city, and half of the soldiers who went in and out of the city were monk soldiers. Sky-Gazing city, like the city of Wanling, was exquisite and luxurious. Towering palaces and pavilions could be seen everywhere in the city, and cloud platforms hovered over the city, on which stood countless palaces. And the most eye-catching city was Iron Wall City. Designed by Gigu Z and personally supervised by MOD, all the walls of this city were made of towering mountains. From this alone, one could tell how monstrous the scale of Iron Wall City was. The thick mountain walls were filled with mechanisms, formations, and countless powerful weapons, ready to launch deadly attacks at the enemy at any time. Whether it was the Deyu dynasty, the Shizo dynasty, or the Ling dynasty, they had all sent armies of 30 to 50,000 soldiers to attack Iron Wall City. But, before they could see what the defenders on the wall looked like, the mountain wall facing them suddenly flipped open, revealing countless holes that were as thick as a thumb and looked like a beehive. Countless arrows poured down, riddling the tens of thousands of soldiers like sieves, and not a single one of them could escape back to their own city. The Ling dynasty even sent a supreme oracle to test the defense of Iron Wall City. But, as soon as the supreme oracle got within 300 miles of the city, he could no longer sense any natural energy from the outside world, and fell headfirst to the ground. Without uttering a word, the supreme oracle turned around and fled for dozens of miles on his two legs. Only then did he get out of the defensive area of Iron Wall City's no-flying formation, and return to Sky-Gazing City in a sorry state. In the face of such a monstrous city defense, the three dynasties gave up the idea of attacking Great Wu and reluctantly admitted that Great Wu was qualified to meddle in the muddy water of the southern region. Great Wu's defense was as tight as an iron-shelled tortoise with thorns, and it was not easy to attack. While Deyu was strong, he dared not attack Great Wu before he had enough strength. Therefore, in the northern region, the mercenaries of the six dynasties fought fiercely against the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty, while in the southern region, the elites of the two dynasties personally went into battle, fighting fiercely on the million-mile battlefield that Gigu Z had chosen for them. Today, Sky-Gazing City attacked Vajra City, and tomorrow, a few generals of the Shizo dynasty would lead 300 to 500 soldiers to Sky-Gazing City. And the day after that, a few scouts of Sky-Gazing City would be killed and hung upside down in front of the city gate. After that, a few soldiers of the Shizo dynasty would suddenly disappear, and when they reappeared, they had been refined into flying yikshaws and joined the army attacking Vajra City. In South Dingnan City, Deyu's soldiers did not move, and they could not play any tricks. But Great Wu's soldiers in Iron Wall City were different. Under Gigu Z's training, they were more cunning than anyone else. Today, they would go out and hack a few Ling dynasty soldiers to death and throw their heads at the gate of Sky-Gazing City. Tomorrow, they would go out and kill a few Shizo dynasty officers, cut them into pieces, and throw them at the gate of Vajra City. All kinds of means of provocation were used. The Shizo dynasty and the Ling dynasty were like two mad lions, roaring and fighting each other. While sowing discord between the Shizo dynasty and the Ling dynasty, Great Wu secretly sent envoys to the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty, constantly demanding all kinds of benefits from them in exchange for the opportunity to form an alliance with Great Wu. Every time the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty fought in the southern region, Great Wu's terms would rise. Every time the number of soldiers killed on both sides increased by 100,000, the price of these terms would rise again. Under Gigu Z's leadership, Great Wu assumed a posture of, "I'm ready to sell everything to the highest bidder." From time to time, he would mobilize 1,000,000 soldiers to patrol outside Iron Wall City, showing off his military might. Occasionally, 30 to 50 huge metal golems would sway and fight each other outside Iron Wall City. The sight of them grabbing mountains and throwing them as weapons left a deep impression on the soldiers of the Shizo dynasty, the Ling dynasty, and the Deyu dynasty. Just one of these huge metal golems could cause a devastating blow to an army of 1,000,000 soldiers, not to mention dozens of them. Not to mention heaven immortals, even gold immortals would not be able to destroy these golems inscribed with countless high-grade defensive spells in a short time. To deal an effective blow to them, primordial experts were required. But, primordial immortals could not be involved in the battle of these ground armies, for a single strike from them could destroy tens of thousands of cities, let alone a single one. When that happened, the land would be scorched to the ground, which would do no good to anyone. Just as the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty were fighting fiercely in the southern region, a piece of shocking news spread across Panga continent in an instant. The 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 800 ghost saints of the ghost realm had left the ghost realm with countless heavenly ghosts and joined the Buddhist League. An army of heavenly ghosts, composed of countless heavenly ghosts, marched directly to the southern region, replenished Vajra city, and became the main force attacking Wangtian city. These heavenly ghosts were ferocious in combat, and they were extremely fertile. Even newborn heavenly ghosts could join the battlefield as the main force. As soon as these heavenly ghosts joined the battle, they immediately dealt a huge blow to Wangtian city. But then, the 9 fiend emperors and 72 fiend kings of the fiend realm, the 7 demon emperors and 108 demon saints of the demon realm, the 18 spirit kings and 3,600 supreme spirit commanders of the spirit realm, announced at the same time that they would join the celestial court. The armies of the 3 realms almost turned out in full force and quickly replenished the military bases of the Ling dynasty. Immediately, the Shizo dynasty fell into a disadvantageous position. Faced with the joint attack of the armies of the Fiend Realm, the Demon Realm, and the Spirit Realm, the Ghost Realm's army was significantly weaker and was no match for them. Vajra city was attacked several times a day, and it was almost invaded several times. Great Wu's emissary immediately went to Kamhart city and offered the Shizo dynasty an extremely high price for the alliance. Chapter 982. Hearing Huang clan's accusation, Shoshin, who had a bitter look on his face, said in a deep voice, "Please forgive me, Saint Empress Hua. This matter is over. The human tribe is still the human tribe, and you are still the holy mother of the human tribe. Nothing has changed, except that you have replaced the current Diyu with a better law." Gradually, 2 figures appeared in the 2 masses of spiritual qi. Seeing them, Huang clan nodded in relief. She pointed to the cauldron above her head and said softly, "Wisdom of the past lives, when are you going to wake up?" Suirenshi, Fushi, Zhuanxiu, Ku, Yao, Shun, you have been reincarnated in the human world for countless lifetimes. Wake up now, wake up now. No one knew the real names of the 7 Buddhas, and they did not have proper Buddhist names. They just had nicknames for themselves, namely Shoshin, Shoshin, Shuyi, Shoji, Shozu, Shoyuan, and Shochi. Shoshin ranked first, and had a hairpin in his hair bun. Shochi ranked 7th, and had 7 hairpins in his hair bun. Huang clan raised her eyebrows, put her hands in her sleeves, and said coolly, "Damn Baldy, you have been blocking the gate of Empress Hua Palace for so many years. It's time to open the gate, isn't it? You have schemed against the human tribe, and yet you do not allow me to help you. This is too overbearing and despicable." Huang clan used the cauldron above her head to conceal the aura released by the 2. At this moment, the great path of heaven was in chaos. The 7 Buddhas, who were close at hand, did not expect that right in front of them, the 2 most important leaders of the human tribe were taking advantage of the chaos of the great path of heaven to fuse with the way. Not to mention that the list of deification, which was made by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Taoist patriarchs to collect souls, and the holy whip, which was used to become a god, were in the hands of the 9 Taoist patriarchs. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs were responsible for blocking the gate of Empress Hua Palace and preventing Huang clan from coming out to make trouble. The worried 7 Buddha ancestors looked at each other. 3 Buddha ancestors had lotuses in their eyes. Chapter 983. On Mount Kunlun in the Ghost Realm, Prince Chang Qin was stroking his zither while a few female immortals were singing and dancing beside him. A slender white dragon wheeled over his head, letting out soft cries from time to time. Dozens of jade trees surrounded the small grassland, surrounded by a clear river. More than 100 colorful carps swam back and forth in the river, leaping out of the water to the tune of the zither from time to time. Countless deities, divine beasts, immortals, and soldiers were stationed on Mount Kunlun, and a plume of purple mist hung down from the sky, wrapping the mountain in the middle. Countless purple runes the size of water buckets could be seen looming amidst the purple mist, condensing into 9 layers of purple bells over the mountain. An endless army of heavenly ghosts surrounded Mount Kunlun. Their skin was blue, cyan, red, green, purple, and all kinds of glaring colors, and their bodies were covered with bone spikes. Among them, there were some heavenly ghosts with extremely strong cultivation bases, standing over 1,000 miles tall. These gigantic heavenly ghosts shuttled back and forth in the void like fishes swimming in the water. Wherever they passed, the void would be pierced through, leaving holes of various sizes. Countless small heavenly ghosts were attached to these huge ones. The big ones were like warships, and the small ones were the crew. They had sealed off all the passages between Mount Kunlun and the outside world, completely blocking all the passages in the void. The 13 great ghost kings and 800 ghost saints had led the army of heavenly ghosts to Panga continent to help the Shizo dynasty in the war. They had been promised that once the Shizo Emperor Wugo became the human emperor, the heavenly ghosts would have a place to live and thrive on Panga continent, where there were endless resources and flesh and blood. They would no longer have to struggle in the harsh ghost realm. Of course, the great heavenly ghost kings would not leave their lairs behind. Therefore, each of them had sent a strong army to guard the edge of Mount Kunlun, lest Prince Changqin take advantage of the situation and destroy their lairs. After all, although the heavenly ghosts yearned for the luxurious life on Panga continent, the ghost realm was the birthplace of the heavenly ghosts, and they could not abandon it at will. The corpses of the countless ancient almighty experts who had fallen here and the treasures they left behind were a great fortune. Neither the heavenly ghost king nor the ghost saint was willing to leave these treasures to Prince Changqin. With his fingers gently plucking the zither strings, Prince Changqin looked at the countless heavenly ghosts in all directions with a smile on his face. How many heavenly ghosts were there? Even with Prince Changqin's mighty divine sense, he could not count the number of heavenly ghosts here. He could barely count the number of heavenly ghosts that were over 1,000 miles long. There were about 300,000 of them, known as strong heavenly ghosts among the heavenly ghosts, and each of them was as strong as a peak-level gold immortal. Coupled with their innate ability to travel through the void at will, even ordinary primordial immortals would have a headache when they encountered them. They've invested a lot of money. Changqin pursed his lips into a sarcastic smile. He lifted his collar and looked at the dense sealing runes embroidered on his chest. The Yellow Emperor had personally embroidered them for him, and their purpose was to seal his real cultivation base so that no one could find out how strong he really was. I'll be able to undo them soon, won't I? What a bunch of weak fools. With his mind in a mess, Prince Changqin put his zither aside and kissed a few female immortals for a while, then walked slowly to the great hall where the mirror of Kunlun was enshrined. The huge mirror of Kunlun was still hovering in the center of the great hall, surrounded by 5-colored auspicious mist. Changqin pressed his hands on the surface of the mirror, and a strong and solemn power poured into his body, which made him feel at ease. The last time he told Wu Qi that he could not control the mirror of Kunlun at will was the first time in his life that he had lied. In fact, the mirror of Kunlun had been refined into his natal artifact, and his life and death were intertwined. He had reached the point where he could break the mirror if he died, and he would die if the mirror was destroyed. He could easily exert all the power of the mirror of Kunlun, breaking through the void, turning back time, and unleashing all kinds of powerful divine abilities. But at that time, Prince Changqin could not tell anyone about it. Apart from the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, the Yen Emperor Shenong, and Empress Enviwa, no one knew that Prince Changqin had become one with the mirror of Kunlun. Apart from the three of them, no one knew why Prince Changqin brought Mount Kunlun to the ghost realm. Everyone thought that he was the spy sent to the ghost realm by the human race, who was responsible for monitoring all the realms with the mirror of Kunlun. Do I need to stay here for so many years for such a trivial matter? Prince Changqin stretched himself and murmured to himself excitedly, when I'm done with this, I'll have to go back and settle the score with a few old friends in that Taoist sect. With my current strength, should I kill them cleanly or cut them into pieces? 3 old men in crimson robes walked quietly into the great hall. They looked at Changqin with a smile and said in a low voice, "May I ask what you want to do this time, Your Highness?" "By the decree of the great celestial emperor, you'd better not do anything." Changqin turned slowly, nodded at the 3 old men, and said, "What's wrong?" "You can't help it." One of the old men said, "It's not that we can't help it, but His Highness is a little distracted these days. He has been presiding over the ghost realm for countless years, and he has never been so restless. So, we know he's going to do something. But, you'd better not do anything. Chang Qin pursed his lips into a sarcastic smile, then pointed a finger out. 3 white swords, each about a foot long, shot toward the 3 old men's necks at lightning speed. A crisp ringing rang out as the old man in the middle took out an alms bowl the size of a human head and shook it gently. 3 white flying swords the size of leek leaves fell into the bowl with a clanking sound. The old man put the flying swords back into his sleeve with a smile, then turned to Chang Qin and said proudly, "Thank you for the gift, Your Highness." 3 flying swords of excellent quality that have almost given birth to a spirit god and become a primordial artifact. You're really generous, Your Highness. The old man on the left laughed. A stream of purple light flew out of his sleeve, transformed into a flood dragon, and swept toward Chang Qin's head with bared fangs and brandished claws. Chang Qin stood where he was without moving, allowing the flood dragon to wrap around him a dozen times, then turn into a purple rope as thick as a thumb and tie him up tightly. The 3 old men laughed at the same time, and the old man on the right said, "We've been lurking here for countless years, and the day has finally come. We've captured Prince Chang Qin alive, seized the Mirror of Kunlun, and foiled the human race's plan in the ghost realm. We can't run away from this credit." Chang Qin just looked at them with a smile and did not put up any resistance. All of a sudden, a furious roar rang out. Kaiming, the symbolic divine beast of Mount Kunlun, had sneaked up behind the 3 old men. Riding on its back, Ying Zhao, the divine god of Mount Kunlun, wielded a huge single-edged axe that was spewing flames, and chopped off the 3 old men's heads with a horizontal swing. The Mirror of Kunlun swayed, and a sheet of green light poured out of it. Before the trio's souls could flee, they were sucked into the mirror and suppressed in the depths of it in the blink of an eye. With a gentle shake of his body, the purple rope fell obediently to the ground. He nodded at Ying Zhao and said with a chuckle, "It's a pity that the 3 of them have been working hard all these years. You've deliberately asked them to do all the dirty and tiring work, and they've worked hard for countless years without getting paid. Now that you've killed them, I really can't bear to do it." Ying Zhao twitched his mouth and gave Chang Qin a sideways glance. Who was the one who ordered them to clean the pens and use the manure to plant flowers? Chang Qin laughed and changed the topic. "Is there no movement from the heavenly ghosts outside? Why aren't they attacking us?" Ying Zhao ignored him and left on the back of Kaiming. It was obvious that Chang Qin was a little restless these days, and he was the kind of person who always wanted to find something to do. Ying Zhao did not want to waste his breath on him. "It's not a good habit to take advantage of your seniority," Chang Qin muttered under his breath. Just as he was about to mock Ying Zhao, a sudden energy wave swept over. Chang Qin's body trembled, and his eyes suddenly shone with a bright gleam. The Holy Mother has finally given the order. Does that mean all outer heavenly realms have reunited with Panga continent? That means more than 90% of the humans in outer heavenly realms have migrated to Panga continent. Hee, that's wonderful. He patted the Mirror of Kunlun lightly and sighed. It's a pity for those humans who stayed in outer heavenly realms. But, with the protection of the myriad spirit cauldron, their souls are unharmed, and they will be reincarnated as humans again. Hee, those holy immortals and Buddhas, your main dish is here. His eyes widened abruptly as the restrictive talisman in front of his chest dissipated into a great plume of flame, and a terrifyingly strong wave of magic power spread out of his body. Shockingly, he was an almighty expert of the Tao-breaking realm. Although he only possessed the overall strength of a 6th-tier Tao-breaking expert, it was already frightening enough. His body transformed into a beam of light and fused with the Mirror of Kunlun. A loud cry rang out from within the mirror as it broke through the void and came to the sky above Mount Kunlun. Its surface expanded rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it had become a huge mirror that stood 90,000 miles tall and 10,000 miles thick. The huge mirror emitted a vast amount of bright light and auspicious purple mist. Wherever the light passed, the heavenly ghosts emitted thick black smoke, howled miserably, and fled in panic. Open the Mirror of Kunlun. Open the portals of 8 realms. Prince Changqing's loud cry rang out from the depths of the mirror. The void of the ghost realm exploded with a boom, and a few holes, tens of thousands of miles in diameter, appeared out of nowhere. The mirror emitted a blinding light into these holes, forcibly opening up dozens of huge portals in the void. Roars filled with a bloody and murderous aura could be heard coming out of these portals. Suddenly, a huge arm, 1,000 miles long and covered in black hair, reached out of one of the portals and crushed tens of thousands of heavenly ghosts with a single palm strike. Accompanied by a deafening rumble, a huge goat-headed fiend god, thousands of miles tall, carefully and hesitantly stepped out of the portal. Glancing at the countless heavenly ghosts around him, the fiend god suddenly leaped to his feet in excitement. He wielded a huge bone hammer and smashed 1,000 miles tall heavenly ghost to pieces. Then, he swung the bone hammer forward and cried out, "Brothers and children, do you smell the aroma of flesh and blood? Kill, kill, kill. Conquer this lovely world." Similar portals appeared in front of the southern heavenly gate of the 33 heavens and Mount Gridrakata. Countless grotesque fiend gods from outer domains rushed up to the 33 heavens and into Mount Gridrakata. Chapter 984. The Peak of Mount Kunlun in the Ghost Realm. The mirror of Kunlun emitted a bright light, connecting the passages between Pangu World and several outer realms. Pangu World was a complete and perfect world. The laws of heavenly Tao were complex and complete, and the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind constructed an orderly world. Everything operated like a precise machine. The species in Pangu World were complex and ever-changing. There were thousands of subspecies of the human race alone, not to mention other species of flowers, plants, trees, insects, fishes, birds, and beasts, as well as new species derived from their hybridization. Those outer realms, on the other hand, were not worlds at all, but interstitial spaces that happened to be born out of the chaos. Often, these worlds had only 2 or 3 main laws supporting the void, such as flame, thunder, and ice. The native inhabitants were of a single species. Some worlds were considered extremely prosperous when they had hundreds of species, while others had only 1 or 2 species that lived on the main laws. But without exception, the environments in those worlds were harsh, and the living conditions were extremely cruel. Therefore, the creatures living in those worlds were especially strong. Even a beetle from those worlds could be as powerful as a spirit beast in Pangu World. As for the top creatures in these worlds, their cultivation bases were close to the realm of primordial immortals and divine gold, or the realm of Tao reasoning and Tao breaking. Lei Meng, the ancestor god worshipped by Wu Qi, and Lao Ai, the ancestor god worshipped by King Yang Shan, were actually experts from these outer realms. They could not break through the layers of space to come to Pangu World, nor could they find its specific coordinates. Therefore, they could only rely on the aura of summoning spells to project their clones into Pangu World, where they could enjoy the sacrifice of blood, and at the same time, give back enormous power to the sacrificer. But now, with the power of the Mirror of Kunlun, Prince Changqing had opened dozens of portals to other outer realms, connecting them with Pangu World. Over the years, he had been guarding the Ghost Realm, inspecting all the realms in Pangu World with the Mirror of Kunlun every day. Those who knew of his existence thought he was just a spy sent to the Ghost Realm by the human race, and that he was only monitoring the actions of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League with the power of the Mirror of Kunlun. But, even the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, the most cunning of them all, did not expect that Prince Changqing was the great assassin of the Huang clan, the vanguard of the human race's counterattack against the holy immortals and Buddhas. Countless grotesque and terrifying creatures walked out of those portals. Laughing crazily, they rushed toward the army of heavenly ghosts that surrounded Mount Kunlun like a tide. The poor heavenly ghosts shrieked shrilly and fearlessly launched a counterattack against these strange creatures from outer realms. Standing over 1,000 miles tall, the heavenly ghosts breathed raging flames and ice, as well as their natal flames. Waving their huge and powerful arms and flicking their long tails, they lunged madly at the enemies. A 3,000 miles tall, elephant-shaped beast, with 6 pairs of extremely long tusks and 8 legs under its abdomen, walked out of the gate with 1,000 miles tall powerful being on its back. The celestial fiend, who was roughly similar to a human but had 6 pairs of arms, was a beautiful woman. She glanced contemptuously at the few heavenly ghosts who were rushing toward her, then waved her slender and fair arm. Suddenly, countless tiny blades flashed across the void, cutting the heavenly ghosts into pieces before they could see what the blades looked like. Grabbing a heavenly ghost's strong thigh, the beautiful celestial fiend took a deep breath, and the hundreds of miles-long thigh rotted in an instant. All the life force, blood, and energy were sucked into the celestial fiend's mouth, and the huge leg turned into pale ashes that drifted slowly down to the ground. It's delicious, just too delicious. My children, we've come to a place with abundant food. The beautiful celestial fiend raised her arms joyfully and shouted to the sky, "This is the blessing of the ancestral spirits. We've come to the legendary blessed land with endless food." These celestial fiend gods possessed extremely terrifying divine sense and willpower. Although their language was different from the common language of Panga continent, their roars contained their powerful divine sense. As the sound waves rolled out, everyone who heard her understood the meaning of her words. One after another, huge elephant-shaped beasts strode out of the portal. On each of them sat 3 to 5 or even 30 to 50 celestial fiend gods with 1, 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 pairs of arms. But, there were very few individuals like this woman who had 6 pairs of arms. Under the light of the mirror of Kunlun, there were only about 100 celestial fiend gods like her. The nearby heavenly ghosts charged at them desperately. The ferocious and brutal heavenly ghosts did not know fear, but these celestial fiend gods easily killed them with a wave of their arms. Countless blades interweaved into a huge net in the void, cutting any heavenly ghost that touched it to pieces. The celestial fiend gods happily inhaled and turned the chopped heavenly ghosts' bodies into ashes, their life force, blood, and energy plundered by them. Dull drumbeats rang out of the portal through which the celestial fiend gods had rushed out. Dark clouds rolled out, and large groups of grotesque creatures that looked like yakshas and rakshasas rushed out in formation. These creatures looked like the servants of the celestial fiend gods, and they formed a neat army and launched a head-on clash with the army of heavenly ghosts. As soon as the army of servants appeared, the celestial fiend gods stopped killing. They roared triumphantly and gestured at which army was stronger. The same fearlessness of death, the same sturdiness of their bodies, the same ferocity and brutality. For the first time, the heavenly ghosts had met an enemy that could match them in brutality and brutality. The ferocious nature in the bones of the heavenly ghosts broke out. They roared and launched a desperate attack on the enemy, and some of them even blew themselves up when they attacked, blowing up a large number of enemies into pieces. The racial talent of the heavenly ghosts was activated. They began to break through the void and attack the enemy in all directions like ghosts. The army that came from the outer realm suffered a great loss immediately. The great Tao of Pangu world had suppressed part of their power. Although they were not much weaker than the heavenly ghosts in terms of physical strength, and were even more ferocious and brutal, they were no match for the heavenly ghosts who could travel freely in the void. The laughter of the celestial fiend gods came to an abrupt end. Their slave army was smashed to pieces by the heavenly ghosts, and they snorted sulkily. However, they seemed to have a very strange racial tradition. Their slave army was being beaten to a pulp by the heavenly ghosts, but they did not make a move. All of a sudden, a terrible howl of heavenly ghosts rang out, which turned into a visible black shockwave that swept across the surroundings. The heavenly ghosts became stronger and more agile in the shockwave, but the slave army that was hit by the shockwave exploded into pieces at the same time. The earth was shaking, and all the mountains nearby collapsed at the same time. The quicksand, seas of fire, rivers of lava, and all the other natural barriers surrounding Mount Kunlun all collapsed and disintegrated. Less than 1,000 miles away from Mount Kunlun, a plain area tens of thousands of miles in diameter suddenly caved in, revealing a huge, dark hole. Ghost aura billowed into the sky, and a hoarse and unpleasant voice that seemed to have not spoken for 1,000,000,000,000 years came faintly. "Do you have to do this? After all, we are old friends. Hee, you must die for behaving atrociously in the ghost realm." The mirror of Kunlun flashed faintly, and the surrounding portals suddenly expanded several times, while more and more celestial fiends rushed out of them. 6 pairs of arms were equivalent to the cultivation base of Tao-breaking Grand Luo, 5 pairs of arms were equivalent to the cultivation base of Primordial Immortal, 4 pairs of arms were equivalent to the cultivation base of Golden Immortal, 3 pairs of arms were equivalent to the cultivation base of Heaven Immortal, and 2 pairs of arms were inferior cannon fodder. There were hundreds of millions of them. The beautiful celestial fiend who was the first to rush into the ghost realm raised her arm and gave a few loud cries. Immediately, the celestial fiends split into a dozen torrents and rushed into the distance with the endless slave army. Meanwhile, she leaped off her mount and kicked it far away, staring cautiously at the huge pit that had collapsed. A deep voice came out of the pit again, Prince Changqin, the descendant of Xuanqiu, the descendant of the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. Why don't you close the mirror of Kunlun now? Do you really want to destroy the ghost realm? Prince Changqin's cold laugh rang out of the mirror. Gui Tunluo, if the ghost realm is destroyed, you will be the one to bear the greatest responsibility. Without your permission, do you think the 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 800 ghost saints would have the courage to leave the ghost realm and join the Buddhist League? Gui Tunluo's voice paused. After a long while, he murmured to himself, can't the heavenly ghosts have a place on Pangu continent? Prince Changqin sneered and said, Pangu continent is the home of the human race, which is recognized by the heavenly Tao. Pangu continent can only be controlled by the human race, and whoever dares to touch it should be prepared to die. Gui Tunluo, you've been hiding in the ghost realm for so many years, and you've avoided countless apocalypses of heaven and earth. Your appearance today will be the beginning of your death. Gui Tunluo snorted angrily and said, you little brat, you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. When I, Gui Tunluo, was running amok, your human ancestors had not even appeared yet. Hehe, if I hadn't been sucked into the ghost energy and been forced to transform into a heavenly ghost, I wouldn't have been cultivating in seclusion for so many years. Followed by 2 thunderous booms, 1,000 miles wide, gigantic, purple ghost claw suddenly reached out of the pit and clawed heavily on the ground. Quite a few mountains were easily crushed by this pair of ghost claw. Gui Tunluo grinned hideously and said in a low voice, well, I'll slaughter all these ignorant fools first, and then I'll deal with you, you little brat. Hehe, it's true that the Wahuang clan has fused with the Tao with her virtues, so I dare not to mess with her. How dare you, Changqin, a little brat, shit on my head. Billowing ghost energy towered into the sky. Accompanied by a hoarse, hideous laugh, a giant ghost head, about 1,500 miles tall, slowly emerged from the black smoke. If one of its claws was 1,000 miles in circumference, and its head was already this big, how big was Gui Tunluo's true form? The beautiful fiend god shivered slightly, then suddenly let out a wild roar and launched an attack at Gui Tunluo. Like a meteor shower, countless knife lights hacked at Gui Tunluo's head in a messy manner. Chapter 985. Gui Tunluo, formerly known as Yu Luo, was a famous and domineering figure among the chaos fiend gods in ancient times. After Pangu created heaven and earth, during the apocalypse, he and a group of chaos fiend gods were fighting for a treasure that was related to their lives, and they were inadvertently drawn into the ghost realm that was taking shape. The first wisp of ghost energy between heaven and earth melted and devoured him along with the chaos fiend gods, turning him into a ghost. From then on, Gui Tunluo hid in the ghost realm to avoid the apocalypse with ghost energy. Occasionally, he would leave the ghost world to collect some rare treasures, and he would also get into some conflicts and entanglements with the mighty figures of the outside world. However, he had always been cautious and never fought with his life on the line. Especially after the appearance of mighty figures of the Tao integration stage, he became more and more low-key. Later, he became more and more scarce. Very few people knew that the ghost world still had a mighty figure like him who had lived since ancient times. Sensing the tremendous pressure from Gui Tunluo, the 6-armed fiend god could not control the fear in his heart and attacked first. Blades rained down on Gui Tunluo's head, but as soon as he glared, a giant bone shield thousands of feet thick and 1,000 miles in diameter appeared in front of him. The black shield was made up of countless human skulls, each spewing out a copious amount of black smoke and phosphorescence. The green flames dyed the shield ghastly and terrifying. Countless blade lights fell on the bone shield. Amidst the ear-piercing chopping sounds, the bone shield exploded into billions of tiny sparks in the blink of an eye. The six-armed fiend god's attack was frighteningly fast, and he could deliver hundreds of millions of slashes in a flash, each of which could break hundreds or even thousands of skulls on the shield. However, the skulls regenerated as soon as they were destroyed. No matter how many of the skulls were destroyed, they would immediately regenerate. In the span of 7 or 8 breaths, the six-armed demon god had attacked countless times, but not a single hair on the bone shield had been damaged. He. Gue Tunluo sneered as he slowly rose from the ground. His entire body was a deep violet color, and his entire body was bright and clean. There was no skin on his body, and a layer of hard and smooth armor that was like glass had replaced his skin, causing him to simply look as if he was made of steel. He looked no different from a human being, except that his face was extremely hideous. More than 10 thick tusks protruded from his mouth, and a thousands of miles long tail was hanging from his butt. His joints, spine, and tail were all covered with pitch-black bone spurs. Gue Tunluo slowly rose to his feet. Standing on the ground, he looked almost as tall as Mount Kunlun, which was hovering in midair. Taking a deep breath, Gue Tunluo stared at the mirror and said with a cold grin, "Changqin boy, if you don't close the door now, don't blame me for smashing this extraordinary treasure with a punch." Prince Changqin laughed mockingly and said, "Old man, with your identity, are you here as a guest by sneaking to a place less than 1,000 miles away from Mount Kunlun? He probably already had the intention to overthrow Kunlun Mountain, right? Don't boast so much. Let's get rid of these fiend gods first." The six-armed fiend god returned empty-handed. She took a few steps back in exasperation, then stepped on a river of lava and suddenly threw her head back and roared. A dark cloud mixed with thunder and lightning shot out of the portal she came out of and poured into her body. Like a balloon, the fiend god slowly grew to about 10,000 miles tall, which was exactly the same height as Gue Tunluo. Changqin's smile grew wider. "Gue Tunluo, she's going to fight you seriously. Don't fail miserably and bring shame to the Chaos Fiend God." Gue Tunluo snorted angrily. He grabbed the bone shield shrouded in phosphorescence and mounted it on his left arm, then clenched his right hand into a fist and threw a clean punch at the fiend god. As soon as Gue Tunluo threw out his fist, the entire ghost realm trembled. All the ghost energy within 1,000,000 miles suddenly gathered around his fist, turning into a layer of light that was 100 miles thick and wrapping around it. Then, he threw it out like a shooting star, leaving a long trail of flame in his wake. The fiend god's 12 arms crossed in front of her, and Gue Tunluo's punch easily hit her. A loud rumble rang out as 2 blasts of air swept past the six-armed fiend god. Wherever they passed, large numbers of low-grade fiend gods and heavenly ghosts were vaporized, while the six-armed fiend god was knocked back several thousand miles and slammed headfirst into Mount Kunlun, which was enveloped by 9 layers of purple light bells. It was as if cold water had been poured into a pot of boiling oil. Kunlun Mountain remained unmoved, but the back of the six-armed fiend celestial god seemed to be corroded by concentrated sulfuric acid. Swept by the purple halo, large chunks of her bones and flesh fell off, causing her to howl in pain. Half of her 6 pairs of arms were gone, and a strong ghost energy kept invading her body. Trembling, the fiend god suddenly fell to her knees. Gue Tunluo's punch was too heavy. Not only were her arms severely injured, but her knees were also injured by the tremendous force, and they could no longer bear the weight of her huge body. Grinning hideously, Gue Tunluo strode up, grabbed the fiend god's head, and swung her up like a straw, then smashed her heavily against Mount Kunlun. Mount Kunlun, which was enveloped by the light bell, did not budge, but the fiend god kept howling miserably. Every time her body touched the bell, a large piece of her body would be corroded away, and the heavy force of the blows shattered her bones. After dozens of blows in a row, all her bones were shattered into powder. Gue Tunluo's claws had even crushed her skull and pierced deep into her brain tissue. Prince Changqin exclaimed, "You are indeed an old senior among Chaos Fiend gods. You are still as tough as ever after not fighting for so many years. Gue Tunluo laughed harshly and said, You talk too much, boy. But, it's good that you know how powerful I am. Once I'm done with this bitch, it'll be your turn. Prince Changqing grinned coldly and suddenly cried out, Old senior, watch out behind you. Gue Tunluo was taken aback. His long tail suddenly disappeared, and like a phantom, he swung it backward in an arc of light. However, there was nothing behind him. Instead, dozens of six-armed demon gods suddenly charged at him from the left and right. Countless saber lights transformed into a continuous mountain of sabers that swept down. Gue Tunluo was slightly taken aback. He dropped the fiend god, who was gasping for air, and raised his arms to fight back. Suddenly, his legs sank, and 6 fiend gods with 6 pairs of arms appeared out of thin air, grabbing both of his legs. Then, countless flashes of light burst out of his body, and a deafening clang rang out. Gue Tunluo's body swayed as he was hacked, and like the last yellow leaf on a tree trunk in a storm, he struggled and twisted in the blade light with great difficulty. The cultivation base of the 6-armed fiend gods was comparable to that of a Tao-breaking expert. Although Gue Tunluo's fiend flame was monstrous, he had not fused with the Tao, and his cultivation base was only at the peak of the Tao-breaking realm. However, he had lived for a long time, and his ghost body had been tempered to be extremely tough, and the ghost energy in him was enormous. In terms of his fundamental energy essence alone, he was comparable to dozens of ordinary Tao-breaking experts. But, in the face of the joint attack of dozens of 6-armed fiend gods, and their numbers were increasing, Gue Tunluo had a hard time resisting. Although his body looked unscathed, each slash consumed a great deal of his ghost energy, and the strange energy attached to each slash penetrated deep into his body, causing his ghost energy to vibrate and make him feel very uncomfortable. Prince Changqing sneered and said, Be careful, old senior. Their numbers are increasing. Her Majesty has told us that there are too many powerful figures on Panga continent, and each of them is very cunning and has many tricks up their sleeves. But, no matter how many tricks they have up their sleeves, there are so many scapegoats in the outer realms, and we can always exhaust these old seniors to death by throwing our lives at them. Gue Tunluo, whose head was sputtering with sparks and eyes darting from side to side, exclaimed, It was Empress Wa's idea to use the mirror of Kunlun to communicate with the outer heavenly realms and attract these fiend gods. This. How could she do this? Prince Changqing sighed softly and said, There's no other way. They have come to Empress Wa's palace, so what else can we do? Gue Tunluo gritted his teeth and said, What did those good-for-nothings from the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs promise me? They said there would be no future trouble, and that the Wawang clan could only sit back and watch Panga continent fall into our hands. Is this what you call no future trouble? The ghost realm has never been invaded since it was born, and now all kinds of people are coming here. Before his voice had died away, a long howl rang out in the distance, and a rough voice bellowed, Brothers, there's a powerful beauty here. Let's go, kill him, and eat him. The stronger the prey, the more abundant the blood essence, and the better the taste. Gue Tunluo, whose head was in severe pain from the beating, turned his head and looked over. Nearly 100 fiend gods, who were similar in size to centaurs, with their lower bodies covered in scales and their upper bodies that of burly men and 3 pairs of curved horns on their heads, were charging toward them with huge stone axes in their hands. They were trampling countless multi-armed fiend gods and heavenly ghosts along the way, howling and roaring. These demon gods were also in the Tao-breaking realm, and anyone who dared to stand in their way, whether they were sky ghosts or demon gods, would be chopped to pieces with their axes. No one could stand up to them, and no one could stand up to them. These fiend gods did not even bother to use any divine abilities or magic, they just charged at them with brute force. Wawang clan. Gue Tunluo threw his head back and roared furiously, A woman's heart is the most vicious. You've got guts. With a deafening rumble, a huge plume of black smoke rushed out of the top of Gue Tunluo's head as he was about to be besieged by hundreds of Tao-breaking fiend gods from the 2 clans, and a black flag that gleamed like waves rolled out of it. The flag depicted the true forms of countless ghost gods, giving off a terrible, suffocating pressure. When the myriad ghosts flag appears, the 9 nether evil ghosts will devour the world. Come out, old friends. As the flag waved, the ground around Mount Kunlun suddenly collapsed into countless huge pits, from which one huge figure after another, tens of thousands of miles tall and enshrouded in ghostly aura, slowly crawled out. Prince Changqin sighed in a low voice and said, "What a pity. They used to be heroes in the chaos, but it's a pity that they have all fallen like this. Now, they have all become the natal fiend gods on your flag." "Well, old ghost, how many ancient fiend gods have fallen in the ghost realm?" Gue Tunluo laughed grimly and said, "I don't know about the others, but there are 108 natal fiend gods refined from the corpses of chaos fiend gods I've collected in this flag, and 3,600 fiend gods were born after the creation of heaven and earth. Each of them is immortal and mighty. Little Changqin, you're still far from being able to destroy the ghost realm." Amidst the wild laughter, countless struggling fiend gods leaped in all directions. Chapter 986. Gue Tunluo's clamor made Prince Changqin laugh coldly. "Old ghost, are you saying I can't make the ghost realm suffer? Well, how about this?" The mirror of Kunlun glowed brightly and spewed out a roar that sounded like a tidal wave. The number of portals in the sky above the ghost realm increased, and the diameter of the existing portals suddenly skyrocketed by more than 10 times. More and more strange creatures from the outer realms poured in, and the speed at which they did so was at least dozens of times faster than before. After all, the portals had grown so much that the number of people who could travel together with them had greatly increased. Gue Tunluo was so angry that his mouth was full of saliva. Holding the myriad ghost banner in his hand, he howled and wanted to jump up and curse Prince Changqin. But how could he jump up when 6 six-armed fiend gods were clinging to his legs? Furious, Gue Tunluo's body flickered as he activated the innate divine ability of the heavenly ghosts. He vanished into thin air and reappeared hundreds of miles away in the blink of an eye. A centaur fiend god, who had just chopped 2 powerful heavenly ghosts to pieces with a large axe, was stunned when Gue Tunluo suddenly appeared in front of him. Grinning hideously, Gue Tunluo swung the myriad ghost banner at the fiend god. Amidst a shrill ghost howl, streams of light suddenly shot out of the fiend god's 7 orifices. His soul was sucked clean by the banner, and his blood essence was devoured by the ghosts as well, leaving only a flaccid skin on the ground. Gue Tunluo was howling at the top of his lungs when dozens of loud bangs rang out in a row. Dozens of short-handled stone axes came whistling through the air and smashed heavily on his body. The axes were unusually heavy and made of some unknown material. At least, such a stone had never appeared in Pangu world, and they were born with the ability to pierce armor. The axes were engraved with dozens of strange runes, and the whistling sound they produced when they spun made Gue Tunluo feel dizzy. When the axes collided with Gue Tunluo's tough body, they exploded to pieces, while his hard and smooth shell cracked in dozens of places. Black, sticky liquid sprayed out of his wounds, and he hissed in pain. He turned his head angrily and saw nearly 100 centaur demon gods pulling out more short-handled stone axes with fanatical expressions, preparing to smash them at him. Gue Tunluo's heart skipped a beat. He had just tasted the power of these short stone axes, so how could he still foolishly stay here and let the enemies hit him like prey? He roared in exasperation as his body twisted and shrunk rapidly. In the blink of an eye, he had shrunk to a height of less than 100 feet, the size of an ordinary heavenly ghost. Laughing complacently, he flicked his tail, which was over 1,000 feet long and 10 times longer than his body, and darted into the nearby army of heavenly ghosts, who were leaping and shouting at the top of their lungs. The centaur demon god and the 6-armed demon god stared at each other for a while. Then, they sniffled at the same time and spat on the ground. The centaur demon god, who was the largest among them, shouted, "We are all from the outer realms. We came here for the delicious food. There is enough prey here for us to enjoy. Let's hunt to our heart's content and not start a war." The beautiful 6-armed demon god, who had almost been killed by Gue Tunluo, had recovered. She rose to her feet a little embarrassedly and spat out a mouthful of green blood. Then, she raised her arm and said, "That's right. There is enough prey here. There should be no war between us. Countless powerful divine senses swept over from near and far, and all the leaders of the alien races who had invaded the ghost realm made the same declaration. Then, thousands of powerful divine senses locked onto Gue Tunluo, who was running amidst the horde of heavenly ghosts, and thousands of grotesquely shaped alien demon gods roared and chased after him. These fiends from the outer realms did not care whether the flesh and blood of their prey were sour, sweet, bitter, or spicy. All they cared about was how much blood, energy, and energy the prey had. The more abundant the blood, energy, and energy, the more delicious it was to them. Gue Tunluo's status in the ghost realm was supreme, and his cultivation base was the strongest. Therefore, his blood, energy, and energy were the strongest, and he was the most delicious food in the eyes of all the alien demon gods. If they could devour Gue Tunluo's body, their strength would certainly increase tremendously. Hiding among the heavenly ghosts, Gue Tunluo was like a bright lamp in the dark, emitting a dazzling light to attract the attention of these demon gods. Nearly 100 alien demon gods and thousands of demon gods leaped at Gue Tunluo at the same time. They had also shrunk their bodies, with the tallest being no more than 1,000 feet tall, and the shortest only about 10 feet tall. Howling merrily, they raised their weapons and rushed at Gue Tunluo. Gue Tunluo grumbled as he glanced around. Among the 108 natal fiend gods in the flag, the ones refined from the bodies of fallen chaos fiend gods were being attacked by tens of thousands of foreign fiend gods, while the 3,600 natal fiend gods refined from the bodies of fallen ghost gods were also being besieged by countless armies. It was like ants trying to devour an elephant. Although the elephant could kill countless ants with one stomp, it could not withstand the overwhelming number of ants. The original fiend gods summoned by the streamer were all tens of thousands of miles tall, while the outsider fiend gods were all different in height. The taller ones were hundreds of miles tall, while the shorter ones were no different from ordinary people. They climbed onto the bodies of these original fiend gods, thrusting and stabbing with all kinds of strange weapons. Among them, some fiend gods who were strong enough actually managed to break through the defense of their original fiend gods and truly hurt them. Die! A furious roar came from afar. One of the natal fiend gods in the banner had a dragon-like body and bones all over his body. His true form was He Gu, an ancient chaos fiend god who had fallen. He gave a deep roar, and suddenly, countless bone spikes shot out from his body. Wherever these bone spikes passed by, everything that was tangible turned into blood and splashed in the air. This strike swept through a radius of 5,000 kilometers, killing countless fiend celestials from the outer realm. It forcefully created a blood-colored empty space in the sea of people. However, this empty space only lasted for less than the time of a breath before a loud crashing sound was heard. Like a tide flowing backwards, the black sea of people once again drowned He Gu's body. Dozens of demon gods with 5 pairs of arms raised their sabers and hacked at He Gu, shattering his bones one by one and chopping up the tens of thousands of alien creatures attached to him. The myriad ghost flag trembled violently as ghost energy kept pouring into He Gu's body. It took Gue Tunluo countless years to extract the essence of the first wisp of innate ghost energy from the endless ghost energy in the ghost realm, and he had refined it together with the bodies of 108 fallen chaos fiend gods and 3,600 fallen acquired ghost deities. With the essence of the first wisp of innate ghost energy as the core, as long as these ghost gods were in the ghost realm, they could absorb ghost energy without limit to repair themselves. As long as they were in the ghost realm, these natal fiend gods were immortal and indestructible. But even so, it would take them a certain amount of time to absorb ghost energy to repair themselves. Moreover, the attacking frequency of these endless alien creatures far exceeded the healing efficiency of these natal fiend gods, and the damage they caused in a short period of time exceeded the healing efficiency of these natal fiend gods. More and more bones were broken on He Gu's body. They were constantly healing, but they were constantly being cut, torn, and bitten off. Before He Gu could shoot out a second wave of bone spikes, his body was torn to pieces by countless alien creatures. A miserable howl rang out as He Gu turned into a beam of black light and flew back into the flag. Since his true form was shattered, he had to absorb a huge amount of ghost energy before he could reform and fight again. Gui Tunluo's heart was bleeding. If the natal fiend gods in the flag could maintain their true forms, it would only take them 3 to 5 days to recover no matter how serious the damage was. But once their true forms were shattered and returned to the flag, it would take them 36 years to absorb enough ghost energy to reform their true forms. 36 years. He did not have that much time to wait at such a critical moment. Just as he was cursing the invading alien creatures, a thunderclap rang out in the distance, followed by a miserable howl. Thousands of alien creatures had transformed into terrible black thunderbolts and slammed into one of the natal fiend gods in a suicidal attack. The black thunderbolts, each about a mile thick, smashed into the fiend god's body and exploded inside. Another beam of black light flew back into the flag, and another natal fiend god was shattered. Gui Tunluo's heart twitched again. He suddenly felt that things were not going well today. This was the first time he had used the flag. Was he going to suffer a great loss? Before he could come up with a countermeasure, miserable howls rang out one after another, and beams of black light kept rushing back into the flag. Before each natal fiend god was killed, they had killed at least several experts with equivalent cultivation bases, as well as trillions of cannon fodder. But, the number of invading alien creatures was too large, and they were wiped out by the enemy's overwhelming numbers. As more and more natal fiend gods rushed back into the flag, Gui Tunluo's heart beat faster and faster, and he finally began to panic. All of a sudden, a burst of strange laughter rang out, and then a grey net shining with a blinding light caught Gui Tunluo in the blink of an eye. A fiend god, who looked like a toad and had only 3 legs under his abdomen but a human face, caught Gui Tunluo with the net in his hand. Then, he turned and ran away triumphantly with Gui Tunluo in his hand. As he ran, he burst into laughter and said, "It's mine. It's mine. Don't take it. Brothers, it's time to enjoy your meat." Gui Tunluo's face turned blue with anger. Just then, dozens of beams of black light flew back into the flag. He opened his eyes and looked back, only to see thousands of hideous fiend gods roaring and chasing after him. Clearly, they had their eyes on his good meat. At least 30 of them had an aura that was not weaker than Gui Tunluo's, and some were even more ghastly and terrifying. The flag trembled violently. Gui Tunluo gritted his teeth and gave the glowing mirror of Kunlun hanging high above Mount Kunlun a venomous look. Then, with a sway of his body, he disappeared from the net. "Retreat, boys. Retreat." Gui Tunluo's voice rang through the entire ghost realm. Countless heavenly ghosts immediately disappeared and followed Gui Tunluo toward Pangu continent. The invading fiend gods also rushed out of the ghost realm and into the boundless starry sky.